At 2 in the morning, I suddenly woke up after hearing voices coming from the room next door. It was my daughter's voice. He still thinks this is a family vacation. My son-in-law let out a quiet laugh. Then everything will be much easier. I lay perfectly still in the darkness, my heart pounding. At that moment, I remembered the warning my neighbor had given me a few days earlier, and for the first time I began to wonder who this trip had really been planned for. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we continue, leave a comment and tell me, have you ever had to question someone you trusted completely, yes or no? Your honesty helps others feel less alone. Some details have been fictionalized for reflection. The message, the lesson about trust and survival, is what I hope stays with you. My neighbor told me 3 days ago that my daughter is planning something, and tonight I'm holding the proof in my hands. The rain taps against the living room window of my Portland house, a steady rhythm that reminds me of pre-flight checks, methodical, inevitable. Each drop confirming what the previous one suggested. Vera Sinclair left 10 minutes ago. She's 71, my neighbor for 12 years, and fellow widow. She hesitated 3 full seconds before telling me what she'd overheard through my daughter's car window 3 days ago. I can still hear Vera's voice, quiet and apologetic. Vernon, I wasn't sure if I should tell you, but I heard them talking about your assets. 3 days. I've had 72 hours to look, to watch, to confirm what I didn't want to believe. The house feels larger than it should. 41 years. Faye and I lived here backing onto the Willamette River, close enough to hear the water when the windows were open in summer. Now, it's just me and the ticking of her old clock in the hallway counting down time. I'm beginning to understand someone else has already allocated. Vera had been walking her terrier past my driveway when she saw the black Lexus Nadine's car parked at the curb with the engine running. She wouldn't have thought twice about it, except the voices carried through the cracked window. Urgent voices. My daughter Nadine Ashford Whitfield, 44, who co-owns an event planning company in Portland that I'll later learn is drowning in $340,000 of debt she's kept hidden from me. And her husband, Bryce Whitfield, 47, my son-in-law, whose voice Vera heard saying Crater Lake with particular interest. The assets, Vera repeated to me 3 days ago, standing in this same living room wringing her hands. Nadine said something about needing to move fast, and Bryce said, what about Crater Lake? Vernon, I hope I'm wrong. I really do. I told her she probably misheard. I thanked her for her concern. I walked her to the door and watched her hurry across the yard to her own house, shoulders hunched against the guilt of telling me. Then I started looking. You need to understand something about retired pilots. We're trained to see patterns in instrument readings, weather systems, mechanical failures. We see what's coming before it arrives. 40 years I flew commercial routes out of Portland, and the skill that kept me alive wasn't just following procedure. It was noticing when something was slightly off. A gauge reading 1 degree wrong, a radio frequency that crackled when it shouldn't, the smell of hydraulic fluid where there should be none. For 3 days, I've been looking for the thing that's slightly off. I walked to the fireplace where Faye's photograph sits in its silver frame. My late wife passed 5 years ago, at 70 after 43 years of marriage. In the photo, she's laughing head thrown back, taken on our 40th anniversary trip to the Oregon coast. She wore her hair short, then silver white and practical. She'd warned me about Nadine's character long before I was willing to listen. I open the drawer beneath the photo shelf and pull out the 1962 Elgin pocket watch, a wedding gift from 1975. It's heavy in my palm, warm from being inside the heated drawer. The gold case catches the lamplight. I wind it gently, 7 turns exactly as Faye taught me. 7 turns, Vernon. I hear her voice as clearly as if she were standing beside me. Not 6, not 8, 7. The watch ticks to life, steady and certain. 43 years of marriage measured in this steady sound. I hold it to my ear and close my eyes. For a moment, I'm back in our kitchen, Faye showing me how to wind her father's watch that she'd given me on our wedding day, her hands over mine, patient and sure. 5 years ago, right after we paid for Nadine's second wedding, the one to Bryce, Faye sat me down at this same fireplace. She held my hands and said, Nadine takes after your stubbornness, but not your heart, Vernon. She didn't get your heart. I'd argued with her, defended our daughter, said Faye was being unfair. Faye just looked at me with those gray eyes that saw through every excuse I'd ever made. You're too slow to see what's right in front of you sometimes, but you'll see eventually. You always do. I set the watch down gently on the coffee table. The ticking fills the silence. From my shirt pocket, I pull out the small piece of paper I found 3 days ago, tucked inside an old Aviation Week magazine that Nadine had borrowed 2 weeks prior and returned last Monday. I'd been looking for an article on the new Boeing safety protocols when the paper slipped out from between the pages. Handwritten in Nadine's precise script, I recognized the careful loops the way she crosses her T's with a slight upward flourish. Portland House, Willamette Adresse, Zilo, 815 mètres, Pension, United Airlines et 4,200 minimum psura. Savings Act Wells. Fargo partial numbers visible from checkbook. Crater Lake Cabin. She'd underlined it twice. The lamplight makes the ink look darker than it is. I read it again, though I've memorized every word. This isn't a daughter's casual curiosity about her father's retirement planning. This is research, calculation, mapping. Not a daughter visiting her father, I say aloud to the empty room, an accountant auditing an estate. The Crater Lake Cabin is the detail that confirms everything. I bought it 18 months ago. 2 small rental cabins on the lake, a quiet investment Faye and I had planned together before she died. I've mentioned it to Nadine exactly once in passing 6 months ago. She asked no follow-up questions, showed no interest, but here it is, with 3 question marks, underlined twice. She's been digging, quietly, thoroughly, for how long? 18 months since I bought the cabins, or earlier back when Faye was still alive and warning me. I placed the watch and the asset list side by side on the coffee table. 2 objects, 2 timelines. Faye's 43 years of loyalty measured in steady ticks. Nadine's 18 months of betrayal measured in handwritten dollar signs. The rain has stopped. The house settles into night silence. Faye always said I was too slow to see what was right in front of me. She was wrong. I saw. I just needed proof. At 8:30 the next morning, I spread 3 pieces of evidence across Hugh Townsend's desk. The asset list, Vera's written statement, and a screenshot Ryan had sent me 6 months ago that I hadn't understood until now. Hugh Townsend is 61, my estate attorney for 15 years. He sat across his polished desk on the 12th floor of Morrison & Reed, with the patient expression of someone who'd seen every variation of family greed and knew exactly what this was. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, the Burnside Bridge stretched across the Willamette River in morning sunlight. I'd watched that bridge from cockpit windows 1,000 times during approach to PDX. Now I was looking at it from the ground, asking for help I never imagined needing. "Walk me through it," Hugh said, adjusting his reading glasses. I explained Vera's account first, the overheard conversation, the urgency in Nadine's voice, Bryce's mention of Crater Lake. Then I slid the handwritten asset list across the desk. Hugh picked it up, read it twice without expression. "And the third piece?" he asked. I handed him my phone with Ryan's text from February 6 months ago. My grandson, 21. Nadine's son from her first marriage. The message read, "Grandpa, what's a conservatorship? Saw an email on Bryce's laptop asking about it. Just curious." I'd answered him at the time, "Legal arrangement when someone can't manage their own affairs. Why do you ask?" He'd written back, "Never mind. Probably work stuff. Love you." I hadn't thought about it again until Vera knocked on my door. Hugh set the phone down carefully. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled under his chin. The silence stretched 30 seconds. "Vernon," he said finally, "if you want criminal charges that stick, not civil criminal, you need to let them execute their plan on Alaska soil." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "You're telling me to walk into a trap. I'm telling you to control the trap." Hugh pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and began writing. Oregon law on elder financial abuse carries a maximum of 5 years. Alaska statute 11.51.200 first degree endangering the welfare of a vulnerable adult is a Class C felony up to 5 years on its own. But abandon someone on a mountain in dense fog with intent to kill. That's attempted murder, conspiracy, and elder exploitation, stacked together. Combined charges in Alaska can reach 15 to 20 years. You need them to act on Alaska soil for the full weight to apply. And if something goes wrong, you make sure it doesn't. He looked up, his gray eyes sharp behind the glasses. You document everything. You record everything you legally can. Alaska is a one-party consent state. You can record conversations you're part of without telling the other party. Oregon requires 2-party consent. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understood. I'd spent 40 years managing risk at altitude. This was just a different kind of flight plan. There's one more thing, Hugh said. He wrote something on the legal pad and turned it toward me, Vernon A. Ashford. If they ever force you to sign anything power of attorney medical documents, anything drop your middle name, sign Vernon A. Ashford instead of Vernon Allen Ashford. It'll be invalid from the start. Any lawyer checking the signature against your legal documents will catch it immediately. I stared at the name. Such a small thing, such a powerful weapon. Yet how soon can you put the Crater Lake cabins in a trust? I asked. Give me 2 weeks. Here's what you need to understand about Nevada domestic asset protection. Trusts, once assets are transferred in, they're invisible, unreachable. Even if someone declares you incompetent, even if they get power of attorney, even if they marry into the family. Gone. 2 weeks later, I sat in a Portland notary office signing documents that transferred both Crater Lake cabins worth $180,000 combined into a trust with Ryan as the sole beneficiary. Hugh had prepared everything in advance. The trust was ironclad, structured under Nevada law, where creditor protections are strongest. It's sign here, here, and here, the notary said, pointing to 3 flag tabs. Full legal name. I signed each page carefully. Vernon Allen Ashford, my real signature, my real name, because this document was real. This protection was real. Hugh called me as I walked to my car in the parking garage. It's done, he said. Those cabins are untouchable now. The transfer won't show up in any public record search for 60 days. By the time she thinks to look, it'll be too late to stop it. 2 cabins, I said, starting the engine. $180,000, gone before she even asks. I drove east that afternoon, 90 miles through the Cascades in August heat. 3 hours of climbing elevation windows down the smell of pine giving way to volcanic rock as I approached Crater Lake. The cabin sat on the south rim with a view that still stopped my breath after all these years. The lake was impossibly blue 6 miles across, surrounded by caldera walls that rose 2,000 feet from the water. No rivers fed it, no rivers drained it. Just snowmelt and rain collecting in a volcanic bowl nearly 2,000 feet deep. The deepest lake in America. The clearest water I'd ever seen. I sat on the porch where Faye used to read her mystery novels on summer evenings, where we'd watch sunsets turn the lake from blue to purple to black. Nadine learned to swim here at age 6, terrified of the cold water that stays near freezing even in July. I'd held her in my arms waist deep until she was ready. I held her until she let go. I should have let go sooner. The cabin belonged to Ryan now, protected, safe. I pulled out my phone at 4:47 p.m. The signal was weak but present. I dialed Nadine's number. She answered on the second ring. Dad, is everything okay? Nadine, it's Dad. I said, though, she just said my name. I've been thinking about Alaska. You're right, I've never been. I'd like to go. Silence. Then her voice came back too bright, too eager. Dad, that's wonderful. We're so excited. Bryce will be thrilled. One stos. Imulf isto. When were you thinking? How about 3 weeks mid-September? The weather should still be beautiful. That works for me. This is going to be such a special trip, she said. Just the 3 of us. Quality time. I'm looking forward to it, I said, and meant it in a way she wouldn't understand. After we hung up, I sat watching the lake turn dark as the sun dropped behind the western rim. The water held the last light longer than the sky. She sounded so happy when I said yes. She thought she had won. She hadn't even started losing yet. 3 weeks passed in careful observation. Then on departure morning, Bryce arrived at exactly 5 o'clock. In 22 years of marriage to my daughter, Bryce Whitfield had never once arrived on time, not for Christmas dinner, not for Faye's funeral, not for his own anniversary parties. But the morning we left for Alaska, his black Lexus pulled into my driveway in pre-dawn darkness at precisely 5:00 a.m. I watched from the living room window as he stepped out, checked his watch, and adjusted his jacket before walking to my door. The doorbell rang. I counted to 5 before answering. Morning, sir, Bryce said, reaching for my suitcase without being asked. Let me get that bag for you. Sir? In 2 decades he'd called me Vernon Dad when Nadine was listening, or nothing at all. Never, sir. Thank you, I said, handing him the bag. He carried it to the car with careful steps, placed it gently in the trunk, then held the rear passenger door open with a slight bow of his head. Nadine sat in the front passenger seat, turning to smile at me as I settled in. The smile reached her eyes and held there, warm, genuine-looking, practiced. Hey, Dad, we're so excited about this trip, she said. It means everything that you're coming. I haven't flown as a passenger in years, I replied, buckling my seatbelt. This will be different. The 40-minute drive to Portland International Airport passed in forced pleasantries about weather forecasts, flight duration, Ketchikan's natural beauty. Bryce drove 5 miles under the speed limit with both hands at 10 and 2. Nadine asked about my comfort 3 times. They were performing care rehearsing concern, laying groundwork for something I was meant to witness but not understand. I understood perfectly. Let me tell you what 40 years of flying teaches you: people reveal themselves in the small actions. The way they hold a door. The way they reach for something that isn't theirs. The way they smile when they think you're not watching. At 6:15 a.m., the Alaska Airlines terminal hummed with departure, energy-rolling suitcases, coffee smells, gate announcements echoing off high ceilings. We approached the check-in counter where Linda, an agent in her mid-30s with efficient movements, greeted us with professional warmth. "Good morning. IDs and confirmation numbers, please." Bryce stepped forward before I could move. "Here, let me hold all the passports, easier that way." His hand extended toward mine. "Old pilot habit," I said smoothly, keeping my passport against my chest. "I always keep my own documents." His hand hesitated mid-air, fingers curling slightly before withdrawing. His eyes flicked to Nadine. She gave a barely perceptible nod, permission to let it go. Linda processed our tickets with practice speed, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Seats 23A, B, and C, window, middle, and aisle. Would you like to add travel insurance? It's comprehensive coverage, medical evacuation, trip, cancellation, that sort of thing." "We already have coverage," Nadine said smoothly, not looking at me. "Booked it online last week?" Linda nodded. "Printed boarding passes." Later, reviewing my email on my phone at the gate, I found the confirmation: travel insurance purchased 14 days ago. My name, my date of birth. Nadine listed as emergency contact and sole beneficiary. Coverage amount $500,000. She'd booked it before I'd even confirmed I was coming. "You're all set," she said, handing them across the counter. "Gate C7, boarding begins at 7:30. Insurance for a 74-year-old traveling to Alaska wilderness. What could go wrong? Everything, apparently. That was the plan. We boarded Alaska Airlines flight 1 90 minutes later. I took the window seat 23A. Bryce settled into 23B beside me. Nadine claimed 23C on the aisle. The configuration forced intimacy 3 across nowhere to move Bryce's shoulder 6 inches from mine. The plane pushed back from the gate at 7:52 a.m. We lifted into gray Portland morning at 8:03. I watched the city fall away below the Willamette River, winding through downtown like a vein carrying something vital. I'd flown out of PDX 2,000 times as captain. This was the first time I'd left without touching the controls. At 35,000 feet, the clouds below looked like snow. Clean, pristine, perfect for burying things you don't want found. 90 minutes into the flight, somewhere over British Columbia, I let my eyes drift closed. My breathing slowed, deep, steady, the rhythm of sleep. My head tilted against the window. My hands relaxed in my lap, fingers loose. I felt Bryce shift beside me in the middle seat. Fabric rustled. His weight leaned slightly into my space. "Is he asleep?" Nadine's whisper barely audible over engine noise. "Yeah," Bryce murmured. "Out cold." Click. The sound was soft, muted by the cabin pressure and the roar of air moving over wings at 500 miles per hour. But I heard it. 40 years of listening for mechanical problems makes you sensitive to foreign sounds. Click a second time. Through slitted eyes, lashes, barely parted pupils, focused on the periphery, I saw Bryce's phone angled toward my chest. My passport sat in my shirt pocket, visible. My red, white, blue Medicare card protruded just above it, positioned deliberately an hour ago for exactly this moment. He photographed them both. I counted my heartbeat the way I used to during instrument approaches in zero visibility. 58, 59, 60. Perfectly normal, calm as landing in fog with only the glide slope for guidance. Bryce's phone disappeared into his pocket. He leaned back in his seat, shoulders relaxing. Through my lashes, I caught the edge of his expression, satisfied smile, barely visible, gone in a breath. Passport number, Medicare ID, Social Security derivative, every piece of information needed for identity theft, or for filing insurance claims, or for accessing bank accounts after someone's declared incompetent or dead. He thought I was asleep. He thought I hadn't noticed. I'd spent 40 years reading instruments in the dark: oil pressure gauges, fuel flow indicators, hydraulic system, monitors, wind shear warnings. Reading people wasn't so different. You watched the needles. You noted the deviations. You calculated what they meant before the crisis arrived. Bryce slipped his phone back into his pocket and closed his eyes, satisfied. Below us, Canada stretched toward Alaska in white silence. 4 hours after takeoff, we'd land in Ketchikan. By then, I'd have even more to document. 4 hours after Bryce photographed my documents, the plane descended through coastal fog toward Ketchikan, the Tongass Mountains rising like dark walls from the sea. The port worker looked up from his computer screen as we passed through the small terminal, and his face went from blank professional courtesy to sudden recognition in half a second. Captain Ashford. He stood mid-40s with graying temples and an Alaska Marine Highway Security badge. Alaska Airlines. I'm Tom Briggs. My father was on your Flight 882 out of Yakutat, December 1998. I stopped extending my hand. Behind me, I felt Nadine and Bryce pause. Flight 882, I said, gripping Tom's hand. I remember that flight. Visibility 0, crosswinds 40 knots, Yakutat to Anchorage. Seat 18D, Tom said, his voice thick. My father was in seat 18D. You brought everyone home, all 53 passengers. He talked about that landing for years before he passed. I'm sorry for your loss, I said. Your father was a good man. He helped keep the other passengers calm while we worked the approach. Tom nodded, releasing my hand. Good to meet you, sir. Really good to meet you. I turned back to Nadine and Bryce. Nadine's smile had frozen in place, her eyes moving between Tom and me with new calculation. For the first time since we'd left Portland, she was looking at me not as a burden to eliminate, but as someone this community knew, respected, remembered. The recognition flickered across her face, instability, recalculation, then vanished beneath practiced warmth. You never mentioned you were famous up here, Dad. She said, her voice too light. Not famous, I replied, just did my job. We collected the rental car and drove 10 kilometers outside Ketchikan, proper to the cabin. Nadine had booked 3 bedrooms, log walls, a view of Tongass Narrows through rain-streaked windows. The water was gray-green, restless, lined with fishing boats at anchor. Ryan stood on the porch waiting. 21 years old, Nadine's son from her first marriage, my grandson. He'd flown in yesterday from Seattle via Juneau, arriving separately for what Nadine had called family time. Hey, Grandpa, he said, hugging me at the door. His arms were tight around my shoulders, but he didn't meet my eyes. When he pulled back, he grabbed his duffel bag and retreated to his assigned bedroom without another word. I heard the door close, the click of earbuds being inserted. Silence. You want to know the difference between a good pilot and a great one? A good pilot flies the plane. A great pilot flies the plane while monitoring weather 3 days out. Fuel reserves, alternate airports, passenger manifests, and crew fatigue all at once. I was a great pilot. Nadine and Bryce unpacked in the master bedroom. I heard their whispers through thin walls, urgent, rhythmic, the cadence of conspiracy. My room was at the end of the hall, farthest from theirs, isolated by design. I unpacked slowly 3 days of clothes toiletries, the Elgin watch in its felt case. My phone sat on the dresser. Recording app installed 3 weeks ago on Hugh's recommendation. 64 gigabytes of storage. Battery at 100%. I opened the app, tested it once. Audio test, September 6th, 6:14 p.m. recording. My voice played back clear and crisp through the speaker. I closed the app, left the phone screen side up on the nightstand. Dinner was salmon and roasted vegetables that Nadine prepared with cheerful efficiency. We ate at the cabin's small table, rain drumming against the windows, conversation forced and hollow. Bryce complimented the food. Nadine asked about my comfort 3 times. Ryan pushed his food around his plate and said nothing. After dinner, Bryce opened a bottle of Jack Daniels. I retreated to the living room with an old National Geographic I'd found on the bookshelf 1987 issue article on glacier recession. I sat in the corner chair where I could see the kitchen doorway, pretending to read, while listening to the Alaska weather radio on the shelf beside me. 40 years of flying had trained me to monitor weather broadcasts the way other people monitored news. The forecast crackled through static. Ketchikan coastal waters, dense fog, advisory. Day 3, 6 a.m. to noon, visibility 1/4 mile, clearing by 1300 hours. Day 3, dense fog, morning only. In the kitchen, glass clinked against bottle. Once, twice, 3 times in 40 minutes. Bryce's voice grew louder, bourbon thick and careless. Old man won't know what hit him, he said. Nadine's voice cut through sharp and cold. Bryce, enough. Silence. I turned the page of the magazine without reading it, my pulse steady at 60 beats per minute. Ryan sat in his room with the door closed, 21 years old. He knew. I could see it in the way he wouldn't meet my eyes at the door. He knew, and he was too afraid to speak, too conflicted between loyalty to his mother and whatever conscience still functioned beneath the fear. I didn't blame him. Fear makes cowards of good people. I'd seen it at altitude when engines failed passengers who knew something was wrong, but couldn't bring themselves to call for help, hoping someone else would notice first. At 10:30 p.m., Nadine announced she was going to bed. Bryce followed her 10 minutes later, stumbling slightly against the doorframe. Ryan's light had been off since 9. I waited until the cabin settled into silence, breathing through walls, the creak of mattress springs, the rain softening to mist against windows. Then I walked to my room, changed into sleep clothes, and sat on the edge of the bed. The weather radio in the living room crackled its midnight forecast update. Dense fog day 3, morning visibility 1/4 mile or less, clearing by early afternoon. I picked up my phone, opened the recording app, and set it on the nightstand within reach. Battery still at 100%. Storage empty and waiting. My bedroom door, I left open 3 inches, just enough to hear voices from the master bedroom or kitchen, not enough to appear suspicious. Bryce's snoring started at 11:23 p.m., bourbon heavy and rhythmic. Nadine's light went dark at 11:47 p.m. I watched the glow disappear beneath their bedroom door from my position on the bed. I lay back against the pillow, hands folded on my chest, eyes on the ceiling. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and rain, and something else, anticipation maybe, or fear. Not mine. Day 3. Fog. Visibility 1/4 mile. Morning only. That was their window. And mine. I had 48 hours to watch them prepare. Day 2 arrived with the timing confirmed and my phone charged. Now I watched them prepare. Bryce left the cabin at 7 in the morning, claiming he needed exercise, the same man who hadn't voluntarily exercised in the 15 years I'd known him. "I'm going for a hike," he announced at breakfast, wearing hiking boots I'd never seen before. "Need to clear my head. You two take your time." He carried a water bottle. The boots were too clean, no scuffs, no dirt bought recently for a specific purpose. I watched through the window as he drove north, not south toward the maintained town trails, north toward Deer Mountain. Nadine stood beside me, coffee mug in both hands. "He needs this. The stress of work has been hard on him." "I'm sure," I replied. Bryce returned 2 hours later at 9:15. The clean boots were mud-caked. His pants were wet below the knees. He carried the water bottle still full. I was sitting in the living room when he passed. His phone was in his hand. Maps app, open blue, GPS tracking line, visible before he thumbed the screen. Dark. Nadine emerged from the bedroom. "Everything good?" Bryce nodded once. "Yeah, all set." He wasn't exercising. He was scouting. Checking terrain, marking waypoints, confirming distances. Planning exactly where to leave me. Here's something about con artists. They always overplay one detail. Bryce's hiking boots were too clean when he left, too muddy when he returned. Real hikers don't get wet to mid-calf on maintained trails. Only off-trail scouting does that. Only someone checking whether a man with a cane could navigate back alone after being abandoned. Mid-morning, we drove into Ketchikan proper. Creek Street stretched before us, the historic wooden boardwalk built on stilts above Ketchikan Creek water rushing below. Salmon fought their way upstream, thick as traffic in spawning season. Tourists photographed the fish. The smell of coffee and frying fish hung in the air. We stopped at a coffee shop overlooking the creek. I ordered black coffee. Nadine ordered something with foam. Bryce stood near the door checking his phone. Nadine slid into the chair beside me, her phone in hand. "Dad, I need to update your health insurance info for the trip just in case. Can you fill this out? Mobigit spars di de space morb. Damai." She held the screen toward me. I took it, tilted it to read. The form header read, "Wells Fargo Online Banking Access Update." Not insurance, banking. I handed it back with a polite smile. "I'll do it on my own device later, honey. Better security that way. You know how these public Wi-Fi networks are." Her smile tightened, held for half a second too long. "Of course, Dad. Good thinking." She put the phone away. We finished our coffee in silence. 30 minutes later, Nadine and Bryce disappeared into a shop selling Alaskan artwork. I told them I'd wait outside, needed to stretch my legs. I found the pine branch near a service stairway, fallen from one of the old trees, dry, despite the coastal moisture, dense hardwood that hadn't rotted. I measured it against my arm, 90 centimeters, the thickness of a broom handle. Strong. I slipped it into my coat's long inner pocket designed for rolled maps or umbrellas. It fit perfectly invisible unless you knew it was there. A good branch, I whispered. Dry, dense, the kind that doesn't break when you need it most. We returned to the cabin by early afternoon. Nadine prepared dinner, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, the kind of careful meal someone makes when they want to be remembered as attentive. We ate with forced conversation about Creek Street, the salmon, the beauty of Alaska. Ryan sat across from me, pushing food around his plate. He'd been quiet all day. When our eyes met his, slid away immediately. After dinner, I placed my titanium walking cane against the wall by the front door. Always the same spot. Routine, visible. Exactly where someone would expect to find it. Ryan went to his room. At 8:30 closed the door, turned on music. Something with heavy bass that thumped through the thin walls. 21 years old, knowing what his mother and stepfather were planning, choosing his earbuds over his voice. I didn't blame him. Fear paralyzes. I sat in the living room reading until 10:15, then went to bed. Brushed my teeth, changed into sleep clothes, left my bedroom door open 3 inches the same gap as before, routine and unremarkable. I lay in the darkness, breathing slow and steady, listening. At 11:04 p.m., footsteps in the hallway. Not Nadine's light step. Bryce's heavier gait, careful and deliberate. The front door opened with a soft creak. 30 seconds of silence. Then the rental car trunk opened in the driveway, the hydraulic hiss distinct in the night quiet. A soft thud. The trunk closed. Footsteps returned. The front door locked. Silence. I lay still for another 5 minutes, then reached to the nightstand in the darkness. My fingers found Faye's Elgin watch. The glass face was smooth and cool. The ticking was steady. "Tomorrow, Faye," I whispered into the dark. "They think they've taken my cane. They don't know about the branch." I set the watch down and picked up my phone. The screen glowed, battery 94%. Recording app tested and ready, 14 hours of capacity. I checked the coat hanging on my bedroom chair. The pine branch was still there, solid through the fabric. Bryce would wake up tomorrow thinking he'd taken my mobility, thinking the fog would hide his crime, thinking I was helpless. He didn't know about the branch in my coat. He didn't know about the phone recording. He didn't know I'd been reading weather terrain and human nature for 40 years. Tomorrow was day 3, fog until noon, 14 hours of battery, more than enough. Day 3 arrived at 6:30 a.m., exactly as predicted. I woke, tested the recording app one final time, and waited for breakfast. The fog came exactly as the weather radio promised, thick as cotton wool visibility, maybe 40 feet, the kind of morning where a 74-year-old man could disappear on a mountain trail, and no one would find him until spring. At 7 o'clock, I walked into the kitchen for breakfast. Fog pressed white against every window, turning the cabin into an island floating in nothing. I glanced toward the front door, where my titanium walking cane should have been leaning against the wall. Gone. I turned to Bryce, who stood at the counter pouring coffee. "Where's my cane?" He looked up, casual as morning light. "Oh, I put it in the trunk last night. Didn't want it getting in the way on the trail. Easier to have it in the car." I held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Long enough that his hand hesitated on the coffee pot. Long enough that Nadine looked up from her phone at the table. Then I nodded once and touched my coat. Hanging on the chair back, felt the solid length of the pine branch hidden in the inner pocket. "It's beautiful fog out there," I said. "I used to fly blind and worse than this. Instruments only visibility 0. You learn to trust what you can't see." Bryce's eyes narrowed slightly. That wasn't the response of a helpless old man. Nadine stood quickly, coffee mug in hand. "We don't have to go today, Dad. Weather's not great. We could wait until it clears." "I came to Alaska to see Alaska," I replied. "Let's go." At 8 o'clock, we climbed into the rental car. Bryce drove 15 miles per hour through the dense fog, the winding road toward Deer Mountain, barely visible beyond the windshield. White line appeared and disappeared beneath us. The Tongass Mountains were somewhere above, invisible, massive, waiting. Nadine sat in the passenger seat, silent. I sat in back, watching fog swirl past the windows, feeling the pine branch press against my ribs through the coat fabric. My phone was in my shirt pocket, recording since 6:45 a.m. when I'd activated it in the bathroom. Battery at 91%. Every word captured. "Visibility's terrible," Bryce said, gripping the wheel. "We could still turn back." "I've landed in worse," I said. Nadine turned in her seat. "Dad, are you sure about this? I'm 74. How many more chances will I get?" She faced forward again, said nothing. "You want to know the difference between confidence and competence. Confidence is Bryce thinking he could trap me with a rotated sign. Competence is 214 instrument landings, teaching me to read terrain when visibility is 0. We arrived at the Deer Mountain Trailhead parking lot at 8:12 a.m. gravel lot, brown wooden trail marker post. Rising from the fog, one other car present. A newer Subaru with Washington plates. Bryce parked. We climbed out into air that smelled of pine and salt water carried up from the coast. The fog-muffled sound turned voices flat and close. Near the trailhead sign, a young couple was taking photographs. Early 20s matching black North Face jackets. Tyler Rhodes, with a trimmed beard and expensive camera, angled his phone toward the wooden sign, while his partner Emma Rhodes stood beside him, her own phone out. The sign read Summit Trail. The arrow pointed left. I approached, slowly studying the sign from 10 feet away. Then I looked at the rocks beside the trail marker, large granite stones, with thick moss covering one side. Moss grows on north-facing surfaces where sunlight doesn't reach, and north from this parking lot position, based on 214 approaches to Ketchikan Airport and 40 years of reading terrain, was to the right, not left. The sign had been rotated. "You folks hiking too?" Tyler asked, lowering his camera. "Yeah," Bryce said, stepping forward with his friendly voice. "Family hike, beautiful morning." "If you can see anything in this fog," Emma said, laughing. Tyler checked his phone screen. "Got the timestamp 8:15. My dad always wants proof we actually did the hikes we claim." They walked past us toward the town trails, their voices fading into the white morning. I walked toward the right trail. Bryce's voice came from behind me, careful and measured. "Dad, the sign says left." I didn't break stride. "Moss grows on north faces. North is right from this parking lot. Sign's wrong." I heard Nadine's sharp intake of breath, heard Bryce's footsteps stop. The sign pointed left. The moss said right. I'd bet my life on moss. I was about to. I kept walking, my hand touching the coat where the branch waited. Behind me, silence. Then footsteps, Bryce and Nadine, following their pace faster than before, catching up. Bryce appeared at my shoulder, smile fixed in place. "How do you know which way is north?" 214 instrument landings at Ketchikan Airport, I said. "You fly blind in fog, you learn to read terrain without seeing it. Runway 11 approaches from the south-southeast. I've flown over Deer Mountain 200 times in worse visibility than this." The moss doesn't lie. Nadine caught up on my other side. "Maybe we should follow the sign. Trail maintenance would have expanded. Trail maintenance didn't rotate that sign recently," I said. "The wood's lighter on one side, where it was turned. Fresh disturbance at the base. Someone moved it within the last day or two." Silence. We walked the right trail into the fog. The path was clear, well-maintained, marked with occasional orange blazes on trees. The correct trail. Bryce was watching me when I'd turned right instead of left. Something had crossed his face, surprised that I knew the terrain, realization that I wasn't as helpless as he'd calculated then, something darker. Recognition that his carefully planned misdirection had failed before the hike even began. He'd covered it, fast smiled, followed me onto the right trail. Not fast enough, I'd seen it. The fog swallowed us, and we climbed into the mountain. 20 minutes up that trail, they'd make their move. We climbed into the fog for 20 minutes before the hunter instinct revealed itself. 20 minutes into the hike, Bryce's pace changed, not gradually, but deliberately, the way a hunter moves when prey is where he wants it. At 8:50, exactly 20 minutes from the trailhead, his stride lengthened. No warning, no explanation, just acceleration from casual hike to purposeful march. Nadine matched him immediately, perfectly synchronized, not asking why, not questioning, just moving with him, as if they'd rehearsed it. The distance between us stretched. 10 feet became 20. 20 became 30 in less than 3 minutes. I maintained my own steady pace, the pine branch tapping rocks for balance, watching their backs disappear into the fog ahead. They didn't look back, not once, didn't slow, didn't call out to check on me, didn't ask if I was keeping up. The isolation wasn't accidental. It was choreographed. Through the white wall ahead, I heard Nadine's voice faint. "Bryce, shouldn't we—" He cut her off. "He's fine, plenty of light. Let him take his time. 30 feet now, 40. They were creating distance, setting up the abandonment geography, positioning themselves, where they could claim they'd just gotten ahead, thought I was behind them, didn't realize how far the gap had grown. "Steady," I whispered to myself, tapping the branch against a granite boulder. "Let them think they're in control." My left ankle was stiff. 40 years of working. Cockpit pedals had left their mark, but functional. The branch was strong, dry, exactly what I needed. My phone sat in my shirt pocket, recording every footstep, Every breath, every moment of deliberate abandonment. Battery at 86%. Hours of capacity remaining. I didn't quicken my pace to catch up. Didn't call out asking them to slow. I walked steadily branch, supporting my weight, letting the gap widen to 50 feet. Through the fog, I could just barely see their shapes, two figures moving, as a unit phones out conferring in whispers I couldn't hear but knew were about me. 9:05 a.m. 35 minutes on this trail. The real abandonment point had to be ahead. This distance building was preparation. Don't chase them. I breathed into the fog. Let them execute. Every step they take away from you is evidence. Here's what they didn't understand about pilots: we don't follow signs or trails or other people. We read wind, we read terrain, we read instruments when we can't see. 200 landings over this mountain taught me more than their GPS ever could. Bryce's voice drifted back through the fog, barely audible. Trail splits up here. Remember which way. Nadine's response: I remember. Remember. They'd planned this. Walked it yesterday during Bryce's exercise hike. Marked the fork. Decided which path to send me down. The shapes ahead stopped moving. For the first time since they'd accelerated, they waited. I walked steadily forward, branch tapping rhythm against the trail, until the fork materialized from the fog at 9:20 a.m. Two paths. Right continued upward with a gentle slope visible through the fog for maybe 20 feet before the white swallowed it. Left appeared wider at first glance, smoother, easier, the path you'd choose if you were tired, if you wanted the simpler option. But I felt the wind pattern change as I approached the fork. The air moved differently on the left, faster, less obstructed, the way wind moves near an edge. The grade shifted subtly downward. The spruce branches on the left side bent away from prevailing wind. North-northeast wind, which meant the left trail faced exposed terrain. Cliff edge. The moss grew thicker on the rocks bordering the right path. North-facing growth, safe ground. Bryce gestured left with casual authority. This way looks clearer, Dad. Easier grade. I stopped, observed the wind, the slope, the way branches pointed, the moss pattern. Then I walked right. Didn't explain, didn't discuss, just walked. Wind says otherwise, I said over my shoulder. Bryce's voice rose, frustration bleeding through the friendly tone. The left trail is wider. I kept walking. Wind comes from the northeast. Left trail faces exposure. The left trail opened its mouth like a promise, wide, smooth, welcoming. The kind of promise that drops you 800 feet onto rocks below. I heard Bryce mutter something low to Nadine behind me. Couldn't make out the words. Caught the tone, frustration, confusion. Nadine's response was clearer. I don't know, just stay with the plan. Stay with the plan. The plan that assumed I'd follow their suggestions. The plan that assumed I was helpless, disoriented, dependent on their guidance through unfamiliar terrain. I walked the right path, branch solid against the ground, phone recording every word they thought I couldn't hear. They followed. Had to follow. Couldn't abandon me at a fork where I'd already chosen the correct path. Couldn't leave me walking the safe route while claiming later they'd gotten separated. Their footsteps came reluctantly at first, then faster, catching up, closing the gap they had worked so hard to create. Bryce appeared at my shoulder again, smile gone, replaced by something harder. How did you know about the wind? Flew over this mountain 200 times, I said. Approach from the south. Southeast you learn the wind patterns. Northeast wind means cliff exposure on southwest-facing trails. Left path was southwest-facing. Silence. Nadine caught up on my other side, breathing harder than she should be after 35 minutes of hiking. Not from exertion, from stress. Maybe we should head back, she said. The fog's not clearing. Weather radio said noon. I replied. We have time. We walked in formation now, them on either side, unable to pull ahead, because I'd chosen correctly, twice unable to slow down, because that would reveal the plan too, obviously unable to leave me behind because I wasn't lost. Bryce muttered something to Nadine. I couldn't quite hear, frustration in his tone, confusion that I kept choosing correctly when he'd set every misdirection. They hadn't expected me to know the right way. They'd planned for a confused old man following signs and suggestions. They got a captain who'd flown this terrain 200 times. Good, but their backup plan was already in motion. I just didn't know it yet. Their backup plan revealed itself 10 minutes later at the cliff edge. Nadine stopped at the viewpoint where fog swallowed the world. 10 feet down, turned to me with a smile I'd seen her practice in mirrors when she was 16, and said the words I'd been waiting 3 days to hear. Dad, could you hold the pack for a minute? It's fast. 9:45 a.m., 1.8 miles from the trailhead. The viewing point jutted out toward nothing, white fog erasing the valley below the cliff edge, invisible but present, marked by the way sound disappeared when you spoke toward it. Bryce and I need to check the trail guide up ahead, Nadine continued, already shrugging off the backpack. 30 pounds of supplies she'd insisted on carrying. Make sure we're on the right path back. I looked at the fog, the cliff edge, my daughter's rehearsed expression. This was the moment. Of course, I said, taking the pack. Take your time. She smiled, genuine, looking warm, the smile of a daughter who loves her father. She'd practiced it well. They walked into the fog together, side by side, footsteps crunching on gravel, then softer on moss, then nothing. I set the backpack down beside a boulder and counted. 30 seconds. Their voices drifted back, unintelligible whispers. 60 seconds. The whispers stopped. 90 seconds. No sound, no footsteps returning, no calls asking if I was all right. They weren't coming back. That was always the plan. I picked up the pine branch, tested its weight against the ground. Solid, reliable. Exactly what I needed. Then I turned away from the cliff edge and began walking back the way we'd come, toward the trailhead, using the correct path my terrain knowledge had mapped. I left first, on my terms. You wanted to leave me here to die, I whispered to the fog. I'm leaving first. The trail descended through white silence. I walked steadily, pine branch supporting my weight phone, still recording in my shirt pocket. Every step away from that cliff edge was evidence. Every moment they didn't return was proof. I'd carried their bags at the Chiasso border. No wrong story. Different border. Different betrayal. Same lesson: the moment someone asks you to hold something, while they check ahead, is the moment you're supposed to disappear. At 10:03 a.m., I reached a smaller fork I'd passed on the way up. This sign had also been rotated arrow, pointing to an easier-looking left path that promised smooth walking. I stopped, read the land. Water flows downhill toward the sea. The sea was east from this position, based on the sun's weak glow through the fog. The right path sloped correctly toward east. The left path angled wrong, the grade too sharp, the exposure too open. I chose right. Left looks easier, I said to myself. Water flows right, trust the water. 50 meters down the trail narrowed. Rocks slick with fog, moisture lined the path. Moss grew thick here, dark green, almost black, wet and treacherous. I stepped carefully, branch testing each foothold before committing my weight. As careful, I breathed. Moss, wet, my left foot, the one that had worked rudder pedals for 40 years, that carried a slight stiffness from all those hours of pressure, caught on moss covering a rock lip. The moss was slick as ice. Moss, slip, fall, 2 meters, dark. My weight shifted wrong. The branch couldn't compensate fast enough. I fell not down the high cliff Bryce had chosen for me, but into a rocky crevice maybe 2 meters deep, hidden by fog and moss overhang. I landed hard on my left side. Shoulder and hip took the impact. My left ankle twisted beneath me, pain sharp and immediate, but not the snap of broken bone. Just badly turned. Very badly. I lay still for 10 seconds, breathing hard, fog pressing down like weight. Slowly I sat up. The crevice walls rose steep on 3 sides, slick with moisture, impossible to climb, with a twisted ankle and one good hand. The 4th side open to fog and more rocks. I pulled my phone from my shirt pocket with shaking fingers. No signal, 0 bars. The recording was still running. Timestamp showed 10:05 a.m., but no connection to the outside world. The pine branch lay beside me, where I'd dropped it, still solid, still reliable. I picked it up with my right hand, testing the weight. Then I began tapping it against the stone wall beside me. 3 short taps, pause. 3 long taps, pause. 3 short taps. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. SOS in Morse code. Exactly like the 1987 pilot survival training course at Yakutat, when they'd taught us emergency signaling in case of crash landings in wilderness. I'd sat through 3 hours of instruction, thinking I'd never need it, that my job was to prevent the crash, not survive it. The sound echoed off wet stone walls, traveling down through rock toward whoever might be below. I paused, listened. Nothing but fog and my own breathing. I tapped again. Tap, 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 tap. My left ankle throbbed. My shoulder ached from impact. But my right arm was strong enough to keep tapping. Someone will hear, I said to the stone. Someone has to hear. I thought of Faye, of her Elgin watch ticking steady in my coat pocket, still keeping time, still holding 43 years of marriage in its mechanism. I thought of Hugh, and the Nevada Trust, and the recording that was still running on my phone. I thought of the branch that had saved me when they took my cane. And I thought of Nadine standing at that cliff edge right now, waiting long enough to seem concerned, preparing to walk back down and report that her elderly father had wandered off the trail in the fog that they'd searched for hours but couldn't find him, that Alaska had taken him like it took so many unprepared tourists. She was wrong. Alaska hadn't taken me. I was still here, still breathing, still tapping. Tap, 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 tap. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short. The rhythm echoed through rock. I'd taught that code to my first officer 20 years ago, demonstrated it during a training review. Never thought I'd tap it myself in an Alaskan crevice at 74 ankle-twisted daughter, walking away thinking I was still standing at the cliff with her backpack. Never thought I'd need it for myself, but I kept tapping. 23 minutes later, someone heard it. I kept tapping. Right arm burning, ankle throbbing, hope thinning with each rhythm. 23 minutes into tapping SOS, my right arm burning with fatigue, I heard footsteps on rock, above slow deliberate, the sound of someone who knew how to move through mountains. I stopped tapping, listened. The footsteps came closer, stopped at the crevice edge. A face appeared above me, weathered brown skin, gray-black hair, pulled back eyes that had seen 50 Alaska winters. The man was maybe late 60s, Tlingit wearing fishing gear with a coil of rope hanging from his shoulder. The kind of rope a fisherman carries the way other men carry wallets out of habit, so deep it becomes reflex. He'd been checking crab traps on the lower trail when the tapping carried through the rock. He lowered the rope without speaking. "Grab it," he said. Voice deep calm, no panic. "Can you climb?" I can try," I said, grabbing the rope with both hands. I braced the pine branch against the crevice wall, testing it. Still solid. Using it for leverage, I pulled myself up, favoring my right foot, letting the twisted left ankle take only the weight it absolutely had to bear. It screamed in protest, but held. The man pulled the final meter with fisherman's strength, steady, controlled, practiced from hauling nets. I collapsed against a boulder on solid ground, breathing hard fog swirling around us. "Thank you," I managed. He nodded once, then knelt beside me and reached for my wallet, not stealing, checking. Pulled out my driver's license, read it in the diffused light. Captain Vernon Ashford. Long pause. Alaska Airlines. Another pause. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Flight 882, he asked. December 14th, 1998, Yakutat Whiteout landing. Yaodidit. I stared at him. I remember that flight. His voice cracked slightly. "My wife was in seat 14C. I'm Cyrus Blackwell. You brought everyone home." His eyes held mine. "You brought her home. 26 years, 53 passengers, seat 14C. Debt paid." Cyrus helped me walk his arm around my shoulders, supporting my weight down a hidden trail I never would have found. The path wound through spruce and moss to a small cove where a fishing boat rocked at anchor, blue paint faded, but hull solid. He didn't ask why I was alone on the mountain, didn't ask where my family was, why I'd fallen, what had happened. Just helped me into the boat, started the engine, and pointed us across the water. "You want to know about coincidence versus fate? I'd landed at Ketchikan 214 times. I fell into a crevice 80 meters above the one fisherman in Alaska whose life intersected with mine 26 years ago. You tell me that's random." The ride took 40 minutes across Tongass Narrows. The fog was lifting now at 11 a.m. Mountains emerging dark green from white, the water gray-green and restless beneath us. Cyrus's village appeared slowly through the thinning fog, 5 wooden houses on stilts, fishing nets drying in yards, smoke rising from chimneys. His house sat at the end, cedar-planked, weathered silver by salt air, with a view of the water that must have cost nothing and been worth everything. He helped me inside to a worn couch that smelled of wood smoke and thyme, started boiling water on a cast-iron stove, brought clean bandages without asking if I needed them. "I need to make some calls," I said. "Do you have Wi-Fi?" "I have Wi-Fi," he replied. "Rest first." "You don't need to." "I need to." He knelt by my ankle, began wrapping it with practiced hands, fisherman's hands, strong, scarred, gentle. "You didn't ask what happened," I said. He secured the bandage, tested the tension. "You'll tell me if you want, or you won't. Both are fine." He served porridge 15 minutes later, simple hot, filling the emptiness I hadn't realized was there. I sat with my ankle-wrapped pain, dulled to a manageable throb, steam rising from the bowl. Out of 40-year habit after any survival situation, I reached into my jacket and pulled out Faye's Elgin watch. Checked the glass face still intact. The second hand ticked steady, reliable, unchanged by the fall. Cyrus saw it from across the room. Elgin 1962, my father had one. The watch ticked. 43 years of marriage measured in seconds. Faye used to wind it every Sunday morning before church. 7 turns. Always 7. My wife Faye's, I said. Wedding gift 1975. She kept it running 43 years until she passed. Cyrus nodded, slowly sat down across from me, with his own coffee mug. My wife passed 2019. Wheelchair the last 3 years. Muscular dystrophy late onset. The silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable, just present. Flight 88-2 gave us those 3 more years, he said quietly. The doctor said if the stress of a crash landing had... He trailed off. You gave us 3 more years together. I looked at the watch in my palm, at this man across the table, at the wooden house above the sea. I'm glad I brought her home, I said. So am I. 2 old men, 2 lost wives. One flight 26 years ago that connected us in ways neither of us could have predicted. Cyrus poured more coffee. The smell filled the small room, dark, bitter, real. She loved the water, he said after a long pause. Used to sit right where you're sitting, watching the boats come in. Even when the wheelchair made it hard to get down to the dock, she'd watch from the window. Faye loved the garden, I said. Spent 40 years growing roses that barely survived Portland winters. She'd wrap them every November, unwrap them every March, talk to them like children. We sat in the silence of men who understood loss, who knew that some conversations don't need many words, who recognized that grief is both utterly unique and completely universal. Cyrus stood, eventually refilled his mug, sat back down. His hands wrapped around the ceramic fingers, weathered from 50 years of fishing lines and nets and salt water. He looked at nothing and everything. He didn't ask why I was alone on that mountain. Didn't ask where my daughter was, why I fell, what happened to the family I'd mentioned at the trailhead, when he'd heard me talking to myself while tapping. Some men know when to be quiet. Cyrus was one of them. But I needed to tell someone what they'd done. Cyrus handed me a piece of paper with Wi-Fi password written in careful script. Tongass Narrows, 1957. I connected, then made the call I'd been planning for 3 days. I dialed Hugh Townsend at 11:45, Alaska time, 2:45, in Portland. And when he answered on the second ring, I spoke 2 sentences that made him go silent for 4 full seconds. I'm at Cyrus Blackwell's house near Ketchikan. I have the recording, all 14 minutes. The silence stretched. 4 seconds is forever in lawyer time. Then Hugh's voice came back sharp, controlled. Don't move. I'm filing emergency POA revocation right now. Do not hang up. I heard typing, his keyboard clicking rapid fire in Portland. Putting you on speaker, I said, setting the phone on Cyrus's wooden table. Cyrus poured more coffee without asking, set the mug beside my bandaged ankle, then settled into a chair across the room. Listening. Understanding, without needing explanation. Vernon, Hugh's voice came through the speaker. I need you to play the recording. I'm recording this call with your consent under Oregon and Alaska law. Do I have your consent, or big band? You have my consent, I said. I found the file on my phone. 14 minutes and 37 seconds. Recorded September 6th at 11:04 p.m. in the rented cabin, while I lay in the dark, door open 3 inches phone on the nightstand, capturing every word they thought I couldn't hear. I pressed play. Nadine's voice filled Cyrus's small room, tinny through phone speakers, but clear. Are you absolutely sure about this? Just leaving him there, see you. Bryce's response? We've been over this 100 times. He'll wander looking for us. The fog won't lift until noon. By then he'll be hypothermic or lost enough that search and rescue won't find him for days. If they find him at all, here's what you need to understand about Alaska one-party consent law. If you're in the room, if the conversation involves you, you can record it. No warning required, no notification, just press record. The recording continued. Bryce's voice? We tell him to hold the pack at the viewpoint while we check the trail ahead. Then we just keep walking, circle back down the correct path, report him missing after 4 hours. Nadine, and if he follows, Bryce, he won't. I took his cane. He can barely walk without it. And even if he tries, the signs are rotated. He'll go the wrong way. Cyrus's face across the room remained still, but something in his eyes had gone very cold. The recording played for 14 minutes. Every detail, every cruel calculation, every moment they'd thought they were safe in their conspiracy. When it ended, silence filled the line. Then Hugh spoke, his voice different. Now prosecutor voice, not friend voice. Vernon, Alaska statute as 1151-200. Endangering the welfare of a vulnerable adult, first degree. Class C felony up to 5 years. But we're filing conspiracy to commit murder on top of that. Class A felony, that's where your 10 to 20 years comes from. This recording is admissible under Alaska's one-party consent law because you were present during the conversation. All that's why I needed it to happen on Alaska soil, I said. You planned this. I prepared for what I knew was coming. Hugh's phone vibrated on his end. I heard it through the speaker. Hold on, he said. The line went silent for 40 seconds. When he came back, his voice had changed again. Vernon, Wells Fargo Portland just called. Nadine attempted to wire $180,000 from your account using the power of attorney 30 minutes ago. They blocked it. They're filing a suspicious activity report with FinCEN right now. 30 minutes ago, 1:50 p.m. Alaska time. While I was sitting here in Cyrus's house, ankle-wrapped, drinking coffee and playing the recording from my lawyer. 4 hours. She waited 4 hours to report me missing. She couldn't even wait a day. Hugh, I said slowly, what time did she report me missing to police? How do you know she... He stopped. Hold on. More typing. Alaska State Troopers. Ketchikan just posted a search and rescue alert 40 minutes ago. Missing person report filed at 2 p.m. Alaska time by Nadine Ashford Whitfield. 2 p.m. missing person report. 1:50 p.m. wire transfer attempt. She tried to steal the money 10 minutes before reporting me missing. At that exact moment, 40 miles south in Ketchikan, Nadine sat in the intake room of the Alaska State Troopers Station, across from Detective Corinne Mercer. I wouldn't know this until later, but Mercer, 52, with 24 years working Alaska State Troopers Elder Abuse Division, looked at Nadine with eyes that had seen this exact pattern 100 times before. You left a 74-year-old man alone on a cliff trail in dense fog, Mercer said, pen hovering over the report form, and waited only 4 hours before filing. Nadine stammered. He has a history of confusion. Medical documentation. Bryce leaned forward. Early stage dementia. Mercer set her pen down. Do you have physician certification? Silence. Mercer took notes, face neutral. We'll begin search and rescue operations immediately. Please stay available for additional questions. After they left, she picked up her phone and made one call. Get me everything on Vernon Ashford, Oregon driver's license. I want to know who this man is before I send rescue up that mountain. Back in Cyrus's house, Hugh was reading me the timeline. Missing person report filed at 2 p.m., he said. Wire transfer attempted at 1:50 p.m., 10 minutes before she pretended to be worried. Recording captured at 11 p.m., the night before planning the abandonment. Vernon, 3 moves in one afternoon, all converging in a pattern that screams premeditation to any prosecutor who looks. I sat back against Cyrus's couch, coffee cooling in my hands. She couldn't wait, I said. She had 18 months to plan this, got me to Alaska, set every trap, and then couldn't wait even 1 day to start grabbing the money. Impatience just destroyed her case, Hugh said. The timeline alone proves this wasn't grief or confusion. This was a coordinated attack. Cyrus stood, refilled my coffee without speaking. His face said everything his silence didn't. She'd overplayed every hand in a single afternoon. Patient was not one of her traits, and Detective Mercer had already started asking the right questions. While Hugh processed paperwork in Portland and Detective Mercer investigated my background in Ketchikan, I sat on Cyrus's back porch at 4 p.m. and traced the timeline backward. The Tongass Narrows had turned gold in the late afternoon light, that particular shade of October amber that pilots learn to read as the last hour before visibility drops. My coffee had gone cold in the mug beside me. My ankle throbbed beneath its bandaging, a steady pulse that kept time the way Faye's old clock in the Portland hallway used to keep time, methodical, patient, indifferent to whether you were listening. Cyrus was inside. I could hear him moving around the kitchen, the soft clunk of cast iron on a stovetop understanding, without being told that some accounting needs to happen in silence before it can happen out loud. I started where all serious accounting starts, the beginning. February 2022, not September, not 18 months ago. February 2022, which meant the plan had been running for longer than I'd first calculated, longer than I'd wanted to believe, about a woman I'd held in the maternity ward at 48 hours old and promised the world wouldn't hurt her. Hugh had called on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of a man delivering information he wasn't sure how to frame. Vernon, something odd. A private investigation firm in Seattle just requested public records on your real estate holdings through the county clerk. Standard request public information, nothing illegal, but I thought you should know. I'd asked who hired them. Client confidentiality, he'd said. He didn't know. I'd hung up and sat with it for an afternoon. Private investigator, public records request, real estate holdings. The Crater Lake cabins I'd purchased 14 months prior, the Portland house, the rental property in Bend I'd sold 2 years before. Someone was mapping what I owned. I'd told myself it was nothing. A title company doing routine due diligence. A neighbor researching property boundaries. I'd told myself the story that required the least courage to believe. 2 weeks after Hugh's call, Nadine phoned. Casual, light. The voice she used when she wanted something and hadn't yet decided how to ask for it. I'd heard that particular register since she was 16, borrowing the car, borrowing money, borrowing goodwill she'd repay later in smaller denominations than she'd borrowed. "I'm just checking in, Dad. How are you doing?" Then without pause, "You still have that cabin at Crater Lake. I was telling a friend about it. She and her husband are looking for vacation rental options in Oregon." I'd said yes, I still had it. I didn't mention that she'd never once asked about that cabin before. Not in the 14 months since I'd bought it. Not when I'd mentioned the purchase in passing at Christmas dinner. Not when I'd described the view of the caldera in a Sunday phone call she'd ended early because she had somewhere to be. She'd shown zero interest for 14 months. Then a private investigator mapped my holdings. Then she called about the cabin. I told myself it was coincidence. 40 years of flying taught me there is no such thing as coincidence in a cockpit. There are patterns, and there are deviations, and every deviation means something is either about to fail or has already started to. I just wasn't ready to read that particular instrument yet. I counted the remaining pieces on my fingers, arranging them the way I used to arrange approach plates before a difficult landing, chronological, each element dependent on what came before, each one meaningless alone, but collectively forming a picture of exactly what was waiting on the runway. June 2022, Ryan's text. "Grandpa, what's a conservatorship? Saw an email on Bryce's laptop, asking about it, just curious." 21 years old, studying for finals at Nadine's kitchen table, walking past Bryce's open laptop to get a glass of water. My name in the subject line of an email from a Reno attorney. Ryan had written down the question and sent it to me like a boy dropping a note out a window, hoping someone on the ground would catch it. I had answered briefly. He'd retreated. I hadn't followed up. That was my failure, not his. July 2022. I wouldn't piece this part together until Theodore Banks confirmed it, weeks later, but it fit the sequence like a gear fitting a mechanism. Bryce had traveled to Reno to consult with Banks about filing a conservatorship petition. He'd brought what he claimed was a cognitive assessment signed by a Dr. Robert Whitmore, geriatric specialist out of Bend, Oregon. Banks had verified the physician's license. The signature belonged to a man who'd been dead for 14 months. Banks had refused the case on the spot, photographed every document before returning them, and made detailed notes in his file, the way meticulous men do when they sense they have witnessed something that will matter later. Bryce had driven back to Portland with a forged document and no legal pathway. So he'd found a different one. August 2023. The handwritten asset list folded into the Aviation Week magazine Nadine had borrowed 2 weeks prior and returned without comment. My house on the Willamette with its Zillow estimate, my United Airlines pension, my Wells Fargo account, partial numbers copied from a checkbook she must have photographed during one of her visits. The Crater Lake cabin with 3 question marks and 2 underlines. Not curiosity, inventory. 3 days ago, Vera Sinclair on my porch wringing her hands telling me what she'd heard through the cracked window of Nadine's black Lexus. Urgent voices, Bryce saying Crater Lake with particular interest, Nadine saying they needed to move fast. And here I sat on Cyrus's porch, twisted ankle, cold coffee, a 14-minute recording on my phone. 18 months from the first investigator request to the cliff edge on Deer Mountain. Not a desperate impulse, not a decision made in grief or panic, or the hot confusion of financial pressure. A project. Plan the way you plan something you intend to finish. She researched me like a target, I said to the water. Map my assets like a treasure hunter. Plan my death like a business proposal. The sun had dropped another degree toward the western ridge. A fishing boat moved through the channel, its nets hanging dark against the amber light. At 6 p.m., the phone rang. Hugh, I answered on the second ring. Vernon. His voice carried a different weight than it had the morning, careful the way you're careful when you're about to hand someone something fragile. About the power of attorney, I pulled the filed copy Nadine submitted to Wells Fargo this afternoon. Your signature reads Vernon A. Ashford. I waited. Your legal name on every official document, driver's license, passport. Bank accounts as property deeds is Vernon Allen Ashford. 3 names, the POA carries only 2. The water held the last of the sunlight. I watched it the way you watch an instrument needle that has stopped moving, understanding that stillness can mean either stability or failure, and that the difference matters enormously. Was that intentional? Hugh asked. You taught me that technique in 2019, I said, when Nadine first asked me to sign the original POA. You said if you're ever signing something under duress or pressure, drop your middle name. The document becomes invalid from that moment, but the signer can't be accused of outright refusal. It looks like an oversight. It functions as a wall. 10 full seconds of silence from Portland. Vernon, his voice had dropped to something close to a whisper. That power of attorney has never been legally valid, not for a single day since she filed it. Even if Wells Fargo hadn't caught the wire transfer, even if every other piece of this had gone exactly as they planned, it would have collapsed on signature verification. Any competent attorney reviewing it against your identifying documents would have caught the discrepancy in under a minute. I know, I said. But you let her file it anyway. Let her believe it was real. Let her build an entire financial strategy on top of a document that was void before the ink dried. The recording is stronger evidence, I said. The invalid POA proves nothing about intent. The recording proves everything. I needed both the recording for criminal prosecution, the signature defect for civil protection. 2 layers, different courts, different standards of proof, both pointing the same direction. Hugh was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that, in 30 years of working together, I'd learned to recognize as him recalibrating. You've been 3 steps ahead since February 2022, he said finally. Since before you even knew what you were stepping ahead of. The sun disappeared behind the Tongass Ridge. The water turned from bronze to the particular deep gray that precedes full dark in the inside passage, that brief window when the world is neither day nor night and the channels look bottomless. She spent 18 months building her case on a document that was never real, I said, researching assets that were already untouchable inside a Nevada trust, planning an abandonment on terrain I'd flown over 200 times, filing a POA that was invalid from the moment I handed it back to her. And she never knew. She never knew, I said, because she was watching for the wrong things. She was watching for confusion, for dependence, for the signs that told her I was already beaten. I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing, cold and untouched, but it had served its purpose, something to hold, while I assembled what I knew into a shape that would hold up in a courtroom. There's still more evidence I haven't told you about yet, I said. Hugh didn't ask what kind. He'd been my attorney for 15 years. He understood that some information arrives in its own time, that the best case is built in layers, and that a man who'd stayed 3 steps ahead for 18 months wasn't finished revealing his hand. I'll be here, he said. I hung up and sat in the dark, listening to Cyrus moving in the kitchen, listening to the water, listening to the Elgin watch tick steady in my coat pocket. 48 years of marriage measured in a mechanism that had never once been fooled by a shorter name. At 7 p.m., an hour after I'd hung up with Hugh, headlights swept across Cyrus's gravel driveway. Headlights swept across Cyrus's driveway at 7 p.m., and I knew before the car doors opened that it was Detective Corinne Mercer. Search and rescue had found me alive at Cyrus's house, and now she wanted to know why a missing man wasn't dead. Alaska State Troopers, vehicle dark blue, official. Deputy Trooper Warren stepped out from the driver's side, late 30s, with regulation haircut and uncomfortable posture, the kind of cop who preferred traffic stops to elder abuse investigations. Mercer stepped out of the passenger side. Her eyes moved immediately, assessing my bandaged ankle propped on Cyrus's ottoman. Cyrus standing protective in the doorway, the fishing nets hanging in the yard that identified this location as a working fisherman's home, not a random safe house. Mr. Vernon Ashford. She walked up the porch steps. I'm Detective Corinne Mercer, Alaska State Troopers. Your daughter Nadine filed a missing persons report this afternoon. I nodded. I know she did. Her eyes narrowed slightly. How do you know? Because I expected her to. The silence stretched long. 5 seconds. 10. Mercer looked at Cyrus, then back at me. Something in her face shifted from search and rescue mode to investigation mode. Mr. Ashford, she said carefully. Do you have something you'd like to tell me? I gestured toward the wooden table inside. Please, sit. We moved inside. Cyrus offered coffee. Mercer declined. Warren stood by the door, shifting his weight every 30 seconds, like a man who wanted to be anywhere else. I placed my phone on the table between us, opened the audio file. "Dole 14 minutes, 37 seconds, I said. Recorded September 6th, 11:04 p.m. at the rental cabin in Ketchikan. Alaska is a one-party consent state. I was in the room. Mercer looked at the phone, then at me. Play it. I pressed play. The room filled with Nadine's voice from 3 nights ago. Are you absolutely sure about this just leaving him there? Bryce's response, what choice do we have? $8,000 a month for nursing home. We don't have $8,000 a month for years. This way it's over. Clean. 14 minutes of conspiracy. You want to know what makes a good detective? Mercer didn't interrupt the recording once. Didn't ask questions, didn't take notes, just listened. Because she knew the moment she heard Bryce say, "Then he dies," that this wasn't a missing person case anymore. The recording played through the trail, planning the signpost rotation, the timing, the fog window, the backpack. Excuse every detail of my planned abandonment laid out in their own words. When it ended, Bryce's voice sang, "Then he dies and we report him missing and Alaska takes care of the rest." Mercer sat in silence for 30 seconds. She looked at Cyrus, looked at my bandaged ankle, looked back at the phone. "Mr. Ashford," she said quietly. "I need to make some calls. Don't leave this location." She stepped outside with her phone. Through the window, I watched her pace the driveway, talking, animated hands moving, head shaking, the body language of someone whose missing person case just became attempted murder. 15 minutes. She came back inside. "Mr. Ashford." She sat back down. "I want this clear. I'm not arresting you for anything. You're not in trouble, but I need your full statement. Everything from the Alaska invitation to this moment. Everything," I told her. The conversation took until midnight. I woke on Cyrus's couch the next morning at 8 a.m., neck stiff from the ankle throbbing, despite the wrapping. Cyrus had covered me with a wool blanket sometime during the night. My phone rang. Hugh, Portland number. Vernon. His voice was different, sharper. "I contacted Pacific Life Insurance yesterday afternoon, asked about recent policy changes on your account." I sat up slowly, pain shooting through my left ankle. "Bryce contacted them 3 weeks ago, August 15th. He used photographs of your passport and Medicare card to request a life insurance increase. $500,000 added to your existing policy. Nadine listed as sole beneficiary." My hand tightened on the phone. "The agent refused?" I asked. "Correct. No direct signature from you. Suspicious circumstances. Age of the applicant made it high risk. But the application record exists. Bryce submitted your photograph documents, your birth date, your social security number." I closed my eyes. I remembered that moment on the plane. Bryce leaning over. 2 clicks. I'd counted my heartbeat 58 calm and thought he was documenting for border crossing. He was documenting for after I was dead. "The photos he took on the plane?" I said. "Day 1, 90 minutes into the flight." "Yes," Hugh said. "Premeditation evidence. I'm forwarding all of this to Detective Mercer this morning. It's strong enough for her to get a phone search warrant for Bryce. Those photos will still be on his device." August 15th, 3 weeks before the Alaska trip. Bryce had photographed my identity documents at 35,000 feet. My passport, my Medicare card, everything he needed to file an insurance claim. Then he'd submitted them to Pacific Life Insurance to increase my death benefit by $500,000. Then he'd invited me to Alaska, to die, so they could collect. "Hugh," I said slowly, "when did they book the Alaska trip?" "NB, dabat." "Hold on," typing on his end. "Credit card records show Alaska Airlines tickets purchased August 17th, 2 days after the insurance application. 2 days after attempting to increase my death benefit, they bought plane tickets to the place where I would die. The math was perfect. The timeline was perfect. The premeditation was undeniable." "Vernon," Hugh said quietly, "this is enough. The recording, the invalid POA, the wire fraud attempt, the insurance application to the photographed documents. This is enough for prosecution." I looked out Cyrus's window at the Tongass Narrows in morning light. Hugh's words echoed in my head. August 15th, 3 weeks before the trip. He'd photographed my identity at 35,000 feet, planning to profit before my body was cold. And there were still 2 more pieces of evidence I hadn't told anyone about. 20 minutes after Hugh's call about the insurance fraud, My phone rang again. The screen showed a number I recognized but hadn't expected. Ryan, Nadine's son, my grandson. 21 years old, voice cracking with 3 months of buried guilt. Grandpa! His voice was small, young, terrified. Are you okay? I saw the news, the missing person thing. Are you okay? I sat up straighter on Cyrus's couch, ankle throbbing. I'm okay, Ryan. I'm safe. Silence on the line, breathing. Ryan, I said gently, what do you need to tell me? He broke. I saw it, he said, words tumbling out. Back in June, I was at Mom's house studying for finals, and Bryce left his laptop open in the kitchen. I walked past to get water, and there was an email on the screen from a lawyer in Reno, asking about conservatorship procedures, asking for medical documentation of cognitive decline. My hand tightened on the phone. I asked Bryce what conservatorship meant. Ryan continued. Just casual, you know, and he closed the laptop so fast, said it was work stuff, estate planning for a client, but I saw your name in the subject line, Grandpa. I saw it. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, not angry, just needing to know. I was scared. His voice cracked. Mom's my mom. Bryce pays my tuition. I thought maybe I misread it. Thought maybe there was an explanation. I texted you that day asking what conservatorship meant. Remember? And you just said it was legal stuff. So I thought maybe I was wrong. I remembered the text. February, 6 months ago. I'd answered briefly, moved on. You weren't wrong, I said. Steam rose from Cyrus's coffee mug on the table beside me. Condensation formed on the cabin windows, morning light filtering through. Domestic warmth. Normal morning routine. Contrasting with the coldness of conspiracy we were mapping, word by word, confession by confession. Bryce deleted the email right after I asked, Ryan said. I never saw it again, but I remembered the lawyer's name, Theodore Banks, Reno. I wrote it down. Theodore Banks, I repeated. Cyrus looked up from across the room, eyes sharp. Ryan's voice steadied slightly. Grandpa did. They really try to leave you on that mountain? Yes, I said simply. I'm sorry. He was crying now. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Ryan, you're 21. You were scared. I understand. Can I do anything now to help? You just did, I said. That name, Theodore Banks. That helps. We talked for another 5 minutes. I told him he wasn't responsible for his mother's choices. Told him to stay safe. Told him we'd talk more soon. After he hung up, I sat holding the phone. 3 minutes later, Hugh called. Vernon? His voice was electric. Theodore Banks, a state attorney in Reno, Nevada. 58 years old, practicing 30 years. I just spoke with him. And he remembers Bryce, May of this year. Bryce came to him requesting assistance with a conservatorship petition for an elderly relative you. Banks asked for medical documentation of incompetence. Bryce provided what he claimed was a cognitive assessment from a physician. Claimed Banks is meticulous. He verified the physician's license. The signature on the assessment belonged to Dr. Robert Whitmore, geriatric specialist, Bend, Oregon. Except Dr. Whitmore died in April of 2021, 2 years before the assessment was supposedly conducted. My breath stopped. Forged document, Hugh continued. Banks refused the case, immediately cited ethical concerns, kept detailed notes in his file. He'll testify. He's willing to provide a sworn statement. The assessment was forged using a dead doctor's signature, I said slowly. Yes, and Banks kept the paperwork. Photographed it before he returned it to Bryce. He has evidence. I looked out the window at the Tongass Narrows. Morning fog lifting. Water visible now, dark green and endless. Hugh, I said, the timeline. I know. May conservatorship rejected. June he married Nadine. July Alaska trip planned. September execution. Every step a pivot when the legal route failed. Before I show you how deep the timeline goes, let me ask. Do you see the pattern? Comment one red flag you spotted so far. Quick note. Upcoming details include dramatized elements to convey the emotional truth, but the core lesson remains. If fictionalized storytelling isn't for you, feel free to stop here. After Hugh hung up, I sat with Cyrus at his kitchen table. He'd made more coffee without asking, set out paper and a pen. Now map it, he said simply. I wrote the timeline, February 2022. Private investigator requests real estate records. May 2023, Bryce attempts conservatorship in Reno. Rejected. Forged medical document. June 2023, Bryce marries Nadine. Ryan sees conservatorship email, stays silent. July 2023, Alaska trip planned. August 15th, 2023, life insurance increase attempted. Rejected. August 17th, 2023, Alaska plane tickets purchased. September 6, 2023, departure, execution phase. Outside, rain began to pelt the windows. Soft at first, then harder. Nature underscoring the darkness we were mapping on paper. Each date a calculated move. Each rejection a pivot to the next plan. 18 months, I said. From research to execution. And every legal attempt failed, so they moved to murder. Cyrus studied the timeline. When conservatorship failed, they shifted to marriage for legal access. When insurance fraud failed, they shifted to Alaska for environmental killing. Every plan had a backup. Except the backup plans all left evidence, I said. Because they were impatient. Because they couldn't wait. I stared at the paper. At the name, Theodore Banks. At the note beside it, Dr. Robert Whitmore died, April 2021. The cognitive assessment Bryce had presented to authenticate my incompetence, to declare me legally unfit to manage my own affairs, to give him and Nadine control of everything I owned, had been signed by a physician who'd been dead for 2 years when the document was supposedly created. The doctor whose signature authenticated my incompetence had been dead for 3 years. 3 people walked into the Ketchikan Troopers station, asking to testify on my behalf, none of them strangers to Alaska. Aviation, all of them reached by the same Ketchikan Aviation Community listserv, where Mercer had posted a discreet notice asking if anyone knew a retired Alaska Airlines captain named Vernon Ashford. The response had come within 2 hours. I sat beside Cyrus in the cramped interview room, watching Trooper Mercer's expression shift from skepticism to something approaching belief as the aviation community lined up to defend me. The doctor whose signature authenticated my incompetence had been dead for 3 years. That revelation from Theodore Banks had cracked the foundation of Bryce's case. Now these people were building the counter-argument brick by brick. Sandra Kowalski spoke first. She was 61, a flight instructor with Alaska Bush Aviation for 37 years, silver hair pulled back in a practical bun that matched her no-nonsense demeanor. She'd trained half the commercial pilots working Southeast Alaska. I've been flying these waters since 1988. She said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd survived 4 decades of Alaskan weather. Vernon Ashford is one of the finest pilots I've ever known. 3 weeks ago, he helped me diagnose an engine issue on a Cessna 206 that 2 mechanics had missed. His mind is sharp as it's ever been. Jack Ferris went next. 64 years old, owner of Ferris Air Taxi Service, built like a man who still hauled cargo himself. Broad shoulders, calloused hands, eyes that had seen every kind of emergency the inside passage could throw at you. He'd lost his wife to ovarian cancer 2 years before Faye died. "We talk every Sunday," Jack said quietly. "About flying, about grief, about staying useful when the world tells you you're done. Vernon's processing loss the way any decent man would. That doesn't make him incompetent. It makes him human." Tom Briggs, the port worker, who'd helped me tie down the Beaver countless times, added his testimony about our conversations, technical details about aircraft, maintenance, weather, patterns, fuel calculations. A confused man doesn't walk you through the proper torquey specs for a de Havilland engine mount, he said flatly. Mercer took notes throughout his pen, moving steadily across yellow legal paper. 2 hours later, I sat in a notary's office 3 blocks from the waterfront, signing the document that would rewrite my legacy. The pen felt heavy in my hand, not from arthritis or age, but from the weight of what I was doing. "I'll full legal name here," the notary said, pointing to the signature line. I wrote it out carefully. Vernon Allen Ashford. The middle name Faye had loved because it meant harmony. She thought it suited me, a man who found peace in the ordered chaos of flight. The new will removed Nadine entirely. The house in Bellingham, the 2 cabins, the modest savings, everything divided between the Alaska Aviation Heritage Museum, the Ketchikan Search and Rescue Foundation, and a $20,000 bequest to Ryan Whitfield. Not for his confession, though, that had helped. For his courage in admitting what he'd witnessed when silence would have been easier. "You understand this supersedes all previous testamentary documents?" the notary asked. "That completely," I said. My daughter had tried to bury me while I was still breathing. She'd forged documents, invented diagnoses, weaponized my grief. Whatever maternal instinct might have kept me tethered to her had severed the moment I saw Dr. Robert Whitmore's signature, a dead man's endorsement of my incompetence. The notary stamped the pages with practiced efficiency. Witness sealed, filed. legal armor against whatever Bryce and Nadine might attempt next. That evening I stood at the end of the downtown dock, watching the sun set behind Deer Mountain. The light turned the water molten copper, the same color as Faye's hair when we first met. I pulled the Elgin pocket watch from my jacket, the one her father had given me on our wedding day, the one that had measured 47 years of shared time. "I'm fighting back," I whispered to her memory, to the wind, to whatever piece of her might still exist in the vastness between mountains and sky. "The way you would have wanted, not with anger, with evidence." The watch ticked steadily in my palm. Faye used to say that time was the only honest witness. It kept moving forward whether you were ready or not, marking truth in seconds that couldn't be forged or manipulated. She was right. The timeline Cyrus and I had mapped proved Bryce and Nadine's deception. May 2023, Theodore Banks refusing the conservatorship case after discovering the forged medical assessment. June 2023, the email Ryan had witnessed. August 2023, Nadine's sudden arrival in Ketchikan with Bryce in tow. Premeditation measured in months, documented in digital breadcrumbs they'd been too arrogant to hide properly. I closed the watch carefully and slipped it back into my pocket, feeling its weight settle against my heart. Faye would have been furious at what Nadine had done. She would have been proud that I was standing my ground. "I love you," I said to the copper water and the darkening sky. "I'm not giving them what's ours." My phone rang. Mercer's number lit the screen. "Mr. Ashford," she said, when I answered, her voice tight with something between frustration and urgency. "We just received notification from the Washoe County Court in Nevada. Your daughter filed an emergency conservatorship petition this morning. She's claiming you're in immediate danger to yourself and others. 14 minutes and 37 seconds, that's all it took to dismantle a marriage." I stood in the observation room at the Ketchikan Troopers Station, watching through one-way glass as Mercer prepared to play the recording for Assistant District Attorney Marcus Webb. The Nevada conservatorship filing still buzzed in my head like static, but Cyrus had been clear on the phone: focus on the criminal case, first jurisdiction, battles second. Evidence now, paperwork later. Webb was 48, lean and angular, with wire-rimmed glasses that caught the fluorescent light. A prosecutor who'd spent 23 years building cases in Southeast Alaska's tangled web of maritime crime and small-town corruption. He'd driven up from Juneau specifically for this Mercer's call about attempted murder, and elder exploitation had pulled him from a fraud trial mid-testimony. The recording played through the evidence room speakers. Nadine's voice filled the small space, clear and unmistakable. "If we time it right, search and rescue won't find him until the next morning." Bryce's response cautious, but complicit. "Weather's supposed to turn bad Thursday. Visibility drops harder to spot someone off trail. As long as Dad veers off the trail, it'll look like an accident." Webb listened without moving his pen, hovering over the legal pad in front of him. When Nadine's final line played, "If search and rescue finds him too late, we won't need to explain anything," he set the pen down with deliberate care. "Alaska statute as 42-20-310, Webb said quietly. "One-party consent." Mr. Ashford was present during this conversation, physically in the room when it occurred. Mercer nodded. "Device belonged to him, recording made in his own cabin. Then this holds in court." Webb flipped through the case file, his movements precise and economical. "As 1151-200 classifies conspiracy to commit murder as a Class B felony. We're looking at up to 10 years per defendant before we even get to the financial exploitation charges." I watched Webb's face through the glass. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just the clinical assessment of a man who'd seen enough premeditated cruelty to know this case was already won. Game over, I thought. The words felt hollow. Victory was supposed to mean something other than watching your daughter's freedom evaporate in an evidence room. "Get a warrant for Bryce Ashford's phone records," Webb said. "And call District Attorney Reeves. We're filing formal charges by end of business tomorrow." "Sir." Mercer brought Nadine into the interrogation room 30 minutes later. Bryce had been separated into a different room down the hall, standard procedure Mercer had explained, to prevent coordination between suspects. I stayed in observation, my hand gripping the edge of the metal shelf that ran along the window. Nadine sat in the metal chair across from Mercer, her posture still composed, despite 4 days of questioning. She'd changed clothes since the initial detention, wore a gray cardigan now, instead of the blue blouse she'd arrived in, but her expression remained carefully neutral. Mercer said nothing, just placed 3 documents on the table between them, aligned them in a neat row, and stepped back. The first, a printed transcript of the audio recording, Nadine's words, in Black Times New Roman font. As long as Dad veers off the trail, it'll look like an accident. The second, the Wells Fargo wire transfer documentation showing the attempted $180,000 withdrawal to purchase the Skagway cabins, initiated while I was supposedly incapacitated. The third, the Pacific Life Insurance email confirming Nadine as sole beneficiary on my $500 policy, updated 3 weeks before she'd arrived in Ketchikan with Bryce and the conservatorship papers. You can hear guilt and silence the way someone stops breathing when truth appears on paper. Nadine looked at each document in turn. Color drained from her face like water from a cracked hull, that slow, inevitable emptying I'd seen in sinking boats. Her hands stayed flat on the table, but her fingers pressed down hard enough that the tips turned white. "This is out of context," she started. Mercer cut her off with a voice that carried 2 decades of interrogation experience. "Ms. Ashford, I've been doing this 24 years. Don't." Nadine's mouth closed. She stared at the transcript at her own words reflected back in official documentation. I waited for tears for remorse, for some flicker of the daughter who used to call me every Sunday when Faye was alive. Some fragment of the girl who'd cried on my shoulder when her goldfish died at age 7. Nothing came. Mercer let the silence extend a tactical choice I recognized from watching enough criminal procedurals with Faye. Give them space to confess, to justify, to unravel. Nadine did none of those things. "I need to call someone," she said finally. Her voice came out quiet, flat, empty of inflection. "Do you want to call an attorney?" Mercer asked. Nadine nodded without looking up. Her gaze stayed fixed on her hands on the table, on anything except the evidence or Mercer's face. She didn't cry, just looked at the papers and went somewhere else, some internal calculation of odds and outcomes and survival strategies. 24 years of interrogations had taught Mercer to recognize that look she'd told me earlier. Self-preservation without remorse. The mental checklist of someone assessing damage to themselves, not processing harm they had caused. I doubt Nadine thought about me at all in that moment. Not about 47 years of marriage to her mother. Not about the college tuition I'd paid, or the down payment I'd given her for her first house in Reno. Not about the Sunday calls, or the Christmas visits, or the time I'd flown through a storm to reach her bedside when she'd had emergency surgery for appendicitis. She thought about attorneys and plea bargains and prison sentences. About herself. Mercer stood, moved toward the door to escort Nadine to holding. Nadine's phone confiscated during intake, now sitting in a clear evidence bag on the corner of the table, buzzed with an incoming text. The screen lit up through the plastic. The message preview was visible from where I stood. "Stick to the story. They can't prove intent. Sender Bryce Ashford." Mercer glanced at the phone, then at the camera mounted in the corner of the interrogation room. Her expression didn't change, but I saw the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth, the look of someone who'd just been handed a gift they hadn't expected. They didn't know interrogation rooms had camera feeds. Didn't know that separate holding meant monitored separation, that texts between co-conspirators were being logged in real time. Didn't know their coordination attempt was now documented evidence of ongoing conspiracy. Mercer picked up the evidence bag carefully, almost gently, like someone handling a fragile piece of proof that would seal a case shut. 72 hours without proper sleep does strange things to liars. They forget what truth they're supposed to protect. I watched Bryce through the one-way glass the next morning, shoulders hunched in the metal chair, dark circles under his eyes, making him look older than 47. Mercer had kept him separated from Nadine, overnight let isolation and fluorescent lights do their work. His text message captured on camera feeds now, Exhibit J, had guaranteed he wouldn't see daylight without an attorney. But Mercer had one more piece to play. "Let's talk about the Deer Mountain signpost," she said, voice calm. Deputy Warren stood by the door, silent witness. Bryce shifted. "What about it? You told search and rescue the trail marker was already rotated when your group arrived." "That's right." Bryce's voice carried careful steadiness. "That sign was already like that when we got there." Mercer slid a tablet across the table. "This photo was taken by Emma and Tyler Rhodes couple from Portland hiking Deer Mountain on their anniversary, time-stamped 6:47 that morning." I leaned closer to the glass, watching Bryce stare at the image. The signpost in perfect alignment, arrow pointing clearly toward the main trail. Metadata visible at the bottom, September 14th, 2023, 6:47:23 a.m. "Your group signed the trailhead register at 8:15. Mercer continued. Sign was correct at 6:47. You arrived at 8:15. What happened in those 90 minutes? Oh, then on reembolsat. Bryce looked at the photo, then at Mercer, then back at the photo. Color drained from his face the same way it had drained from Nadine's when confronted with wire transfer documentation. Genetic inheritance, I thought. They even collapsed the same way. He said nothing. The timestamp was immutable, backed by cellular tower data and GPS coordinates. The young couple from Portland had inadvertently documented the exact moment before Bryce rotated that sign, before he'd pointed me toward the ridge that should have killed me. Mercer stood, movements deliberate. Bryce Ashford, I'm placing you under arrest for endangering the welfare of a vulnerable adult in the first-degree Alaska statute as 11-100. Deputy Warren moved forward with handcuffs. The metallic click echoed as he secured Bryce's wrist behind his back. You have the right to remain silent, Mercer continued. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided. Evidence doesn't argue, it just sits on tables immovable as mountains waiting for lies to collapse around it. Bryce stared at his reflection in the metal table face distorted by brushed steel. I want my lawyer, he whispered. Of course, Mercer said. But you should know Jake Hartley is waiting in the hallway to give his statement. The bartender from your first night in Ketchikan. He remembers you researching hypothermia symptoms on your phone, writing down survival time, estimates in cold water. He's ready to testify. Bryce's face went white. That first night before the hike, before the rotated sign, he'd been doing homework, calculating how long exposure would take to finish what misdirection started. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not rage exactly, but hollow acknowledgement of how thoroughly they'd planned my death. Warren led Bryce toward the door. As they passed the observation window, Bryce glanced toward the glass, couldn't see, didn't know I was there, but instinct made him look. I stayed still watching the man who tried to murder me shuffle past in handcuffs. 2 hours later, I sat in Cyrus's living room overlooking the Tongass Narrows, phone pressed to my ear while Hugh delivered his report from Bellingham. Mid-September, light painted the water-silver fishing boats moving through the channel like pieces on a chessboard I'd been playing for months. Nadine's attorney requested complete asset documentation for civil proceedings. Hugh said satisfaction evident. I informed them the power of attorney was void due to incorrect signature validation. The wire transfer had been blocked. And both Crater Lake cabins were moved into a Nevada Domestic Asset Protection Trust 6 months ago. March 2023, 5 months before Nadine arrived in Ketchikan with forged documents and manufactured concern. 6 months before she'd printed that list of my assets and started calculating her inheritance. How long had you known what they were? The question escaped before I could stop it. Hugh paused. I didn't know, Vernon, but after Faye died, you asked me to make everything bulletproof. You said grief makes people do strange things, that you wanted to protect what you'd built together. I thought you were being cautious. Now I realize you were being prescient. I looked out at the water, at mountains rising beyond the channel. Faye and I had spent 47 years building something solid, not just the house or cabins or savings, but trust legacy, something worth protecting from people who saw family as inventory. What does she have left? I asked. Nothing she can touch, Hugh said quietly. The house is in the trust. The cabins are protected under Nevada statute DAPT shields, assets from creditor claims, including civil judgments. Your retirement accounts have proper beneficiary designations that supersede any conservatorship attempt. She can file motions until legal fees bankrupt her. It won't change the structure. Nothing that was ever really available, I said. Hugh made a sound that might have been agreement. Her lawyer went silent for 2 minutes when I explained the timeline. Asked if this had been planned in advance. I told him my client has been planning his retirement for years. I hung up and stared at the channel. She'd spent 18 months mapping a fortune that was already gone when she printed that list. Cyrus emerged from the kitchen with coffee, set a mug beside me. I pulled a yellowed envelope from my jacket pocket, the one I'd been carrying for 5 days waiting for the right moment. There's one more thing Faye made me promise before she died, I said. One more name on the list. Cyrus looked confused. The criminal case was closed. Assets protected Nadine and Bryce in custody, awaiting arraignment. What else could there be? I showed him the postmark February 2008. 14 years old ink, faded but legible. And this isn't about Nadine, I said. Cyrus stared at the yellowed envelope, questions forming on his lips when my phone rang. The one number I hadn't expected Ryan calling back on his own. I answered, stepping toward the window overlooking the channel. Ryan. Grandpa. His voice came through quiet, uncertain. Did I help with the conservatorship information I gave you? I looked at the Elgin watch in my other hand, the one Faye's father had given me on our wedding day. The second hand swept around the face with mechanical precision, measuring time that couldn't be forged or manipulated. You helped, I said. More than you know. Are you going to be okay? The question caught me off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because he'd asked it at all. 21 years old, caught between his mother's scheme and his own conscience, and he was worried about me. I've been okay, I said. I'll stay okay. Silence stretched between us, filled with everything neither of us knew how to say. Finally, Ryan's voice came through again, smaller this time. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I should have told you about the conservatorship email the day I saw it. Ryan, you're 21. You were scared of your stepfather. I understand that. Another pause. I heard him breathing on the other end, heard the weight of guilt he'd been carrying since June, when he'd glimpsed that email on Bryce's laptop. It's the cabin at Crater Lake, I said quietly. You'll have it one day, not because you earned it perfectly, because you called, and calling took courage. The sound that came through the phone was soft, broken, Ryan crying the way young men cry when they're trying not to. I listened, said nothing more. Some gifts don't need explanation. Some forgiveness doesn't need conditions. Forgiveness doesn't erase, it just makes room for what comes next. I hung up after another minute, turned to find Cyrus watching me, with the expression of someone who'd witnessed something private and sacred. He nodded, once asked no questions, and went to refill his coffee. That evening, Jake Hartley walked into the Ketchikan Troopers Station of his own accord. He was 45, built solid from years hauling kegs and breaking up fights. Weathered face and careful eyes that had seen enough drunk confessions to know the difference between bar talk and genuine threat. He'd been tending bar at the Harbor Light Tavern for 17 years, long enough to develop instincts about which stories mattered. Mercer met him in the lobby, surprised to see him outside of his scheduled testimony about Bryce's hypothermia research. I read the news about the missing elderly man case, Jake said without preamble. The guy you arrested, Bryce Ashford. He was in my bar the first night they arrived in Ketchikan. You already gave a statement about the phone research, Mercer said. There's something else. Jake pulled out his phone, showed Mercer a photo of the credit card receipt from that night, the one he'd kept, because the signature had been illegible, and he'd needed documentation for the charge. He was pretty drunk by midnight, said something I thought was just talk at the time. Mercer waited. He said old man won't know what hit him. I remember because I asked if he was okay if someone was giving him trouble. He just laughed, waved me off, said he was talking about a business deal. But after reading about what he tried to do to his father-in-law on that mountain, would you make a formal statement? Mercer asked. Jake met her eyes. That's why I'm here. Mercer led him to an interview room, grateful for citizens who understood that silence made them complicit. The hypothermia research had been damning. The rotated signpost photo had been conclusive. The audio recording had been devastating. But this drunk premeditation spoken aloud the night before the hike, this would make the jury's job simple. The next morning, Cyrus drove me to Ketchikan Airport. We were two old men past needing to fill silence content, to watch the channel slide by through rain-streaked windows. The forecast called for clearing skies by afternoon, but Southeast Alaska didn't care much about forecasts. At the terminal entrance, Cyrus put the truck in park, but didn't turn off the engine. I grabbed my duffel from the back seat, the same bag I'd carried for 40 years of overnight layovers and emergency flights, now holding a week's worth of evidence that my daughter had tried to kill me. Next time you're in Ketchikan, Cyrus started. I'll call ahead, I said. He smiled for the first time since I'd met him, not a big smile, just the slight upturn at the corners of his mouth that men of our generation allowed themselves when genuine affection surfaced. I extended my hand. He shook it, grip firm and brief, then released. No embrace, no prolonged farewell. We'd survived a week of legal warfare together, built something like friendship in the spaces between evidence review and strategy sessions. That was enough. I stepped out of the truck, shouldered the duffel, and turned back one last time. Cyrus raised 2 fingers from the steering wheel in acknowledgement. I nodded once. He drove away. Some friendships are forged in fire, burned clean of need for words. Inside the terminal, I checked in for the Alaska Airlines flight to Seattle, then Portland. The gate agent processed my boarding pass with practiced efficiency, asked if I needed assistance boarding. I almost laughed. 74 years old, just survived attempted murder by my own daughter, testified against her in a criminal investigation. And she wanted to know if I needed help walking onto an airplane. "I'm fine," I said. "Thank you." I walked down the jet bridge alone, duffel over one shoulder, feeling the metal grating under my feet. Landed in Ketchikan 214 times. First time I'd left on foot instead of in a cockpit. First time I'd been passenger instead of pilot. Most important landing I'd ever made. I found seat 14A settled in by the window, watched ground crew load baggage below. The intercom crackled to life. "Good morning, folks. This is your captain speaking, Captain Sarah Linden. Welcome aboard Alaska Airlines Flight 67 to Seattle with continuing service to Portland." I froze, hand gripping the armrest. Sarah Linden, my first officer from 2004, the one I'd trained on the Seattle-Juneau route when she was fresh out of flight school. 22 years later, she was captain, flying me home. She had no idea I was aboard. Sarah had walked through the cabin. Mid-flight stopped at row 14, recognized me instantly. We'd talked for 20 minutes about flight paths and grandchildren and the decades between then and now. She'd become captain. I'd survived my daughter's attempt to bury me. We shook hands at baggage claim in Portland and went our separate ways, two pilots whose lives had briefly intersected again at 35,000 feet. 1 week later, I stood in my own kitchen and realized I was packing to leave forever. The house in Portland had held 41 years of marriage, every room stamped with Faye's choices, the blue tile backsplash she'd insisted on. Despite my protests, the reading nook by the south window, where she'd spent Sunday afternoons with mystery novels, the garden visible through the kitchen window that still bloomed in October without knowing she was gone. Roses she'd planted in 1985 still produced flowers every fall, biological memory outlasting the woman who'd tended them. I packed methodically. 8 cardboard boxes lined up in the living room, each labeled in black marker photos. Books, kitchen, personal. The pilot uniform went into the final box, dress blues I hadn't worn since my retirement dinner in 2018. Faye had been there, proud and radiant in the green dress that matched her eyes, watching me accept the plaque that commemorated 42 years of commercial aviation without incident. 41 years of marriage, 8 boxes, mathematics of grief. In the kitchen, I ran my hand along the counter where Faye had taught Nadine to bake Christmas cookies every December. She'd been patient with our daughter, shown her how to measure flour properly, how to test oven temperature, how to shape dough into stars and trees and bells, taught a predator to smile while holding rolling pins. The counter was cold under my palm granite that held no memory of warmth or laughter, or the slow accumulation of betrayal that had been building in Nadine's heart for years. I sealed the kitchen box and moved to the bedroom. The knock on the front door came as I was wrapping Faye's framed photographs in newspaper. Vera Sinclair stood on the porch, 71 years old. Gray hair pulled back in the same practical bun she'd worn since her husband died 3 years ago. She'd lived next door for 16 years, kept her lawn immaculate, brought us casseroles after Faye's funeral. "Vernon," she said, "I saw the moving truck reservation notice on your door. Are you all right? Oh, it meesberstein for at us." "I'm better than all right, Vera." I met her eyes, let her see the weight that had lifted since Alaska. "Thank you for telling me what you heard." Her expression shifted, relief mixed with sadness, the look of someone who'd carried a burden and was glad to set it down. 2 months ago, late July, she'd knocked on this same door and told me she'd heard voices from my backyard while watering her roses. Nadine and Bryce sitting on the deck, discussing conservatorship timelines and asset liquidation, calculating my worth in spreadsheet terms. Vera had written down what she remembered, handed me the note with shaking hands. "Pilots don't panic at 30,000 feet. They calculate, adjust, land." "You're leaving?" she asked now, glancing past me at the boxes. Astoria," I said. "Town on the coast, near the mouth of the Columbia River." Vera nodded slowly, understanding settling in her features. Faye would have liked the ocean. I stopped, one hand still holding the photograph. I'd been wrapping Faye and me on our wedding day 47 years ago, both impossibly young and certain that love was enough to build a life on. We'd been right mostly. Love had been enough. It just hadn't been enough to save our daughter from whatever darkness had taken root in her. "Yes," I said quietly. "She would have." Vera squeezed my arm, once said nothing more, and walked back to her house. I watched her go, grateful for neighbors who paid attention, who understood that silence in the face of wrongdoing made you complicit. I locked the door an hour later without looking back. 2 weeks after returning from Alaska, Mercer called for a final video debrief. Her face appeared on my laptop screen, sharp and professional, in the trooper's station office. "Mr. Ashford," she said after the preliminaries were done, after we'd reviewed the formal charges and arraignment dates and prosecution timeline. "I need to ask you something that's been bothering me since we closed the case." I waited. "Why did you agree to go to Alaska if you already knew what they were planning?" I looked straight into the camera, into her eyes through the digital distance between Ketchikan and Portland. Detective Oregon law on elder financial abuse carries a maximum sentence of 5 years. Alaska statute 1151.200 first degree endangering the welfare of a vulnerable adult is a Class B felony up to 10 years. I needed them to commit the crime on Alaska soil, where the charges would stick harder. Mercer went silent. I watched her process the implications, watched her realize that the elderly man she'd been protecting had never needed protection at all. He'd needed jurisdiction. "I was a captain for 40 years, I continued. Never sent my crew into danger without a flight plan, without knowing every variable I could control and preparing for the ones I couldn't. Wasn't about to start taking unnecessary risks at 74. How long had he been 10 moves ahead? Mercer exhaled slowly. "That's either the bravest or the most reckless thing I've ever heard." "Not much difference at 74, I said. "Nadine planned to use Alaska against me. Remote location, difficult rescue, plausible accident. I used Alaska for myself. 40 years of knowing terrain." She nodded, something like respect crossing her features. "The recording, the financial documentation, the witness statements, you gave us everything we needed before we even knew we needed it." "Evidence doesn't collect itself," I said. We ended the call with mutual acknowledgement that some victories required walking into the fire to prove you wouldn't burn. I closed the laptop, looked around the empty living room at the boxes that contained everything I'd chosen to keep from a life that was ending so another could begin. My phone rang. Hugh Townsend. "Vernon," he said, voice tight. "Nadine's lawyer just filed a motion to dismiss based on entrapment. They're claiming you knowingly walked into danger to manufacture criminal charges, that the entire Alaska trip was a setup." I stared at the boxes, at the evidence of careful planning spread across my living room floor. The strategy that had saved me might now unravel everything. The entrapment motion was denied within 48 hours. Judge ruled that genuine danger to life superseded prior knowledge that documenting a crime didn't constitute creating one. Hugh had sounded relieved when he called with the news. I'd just felt tired. 6 weeks later, the phone rang with news I'd stopped waiting for. I sat on the porch of my Astoria apartment, watching November rain sweep across the Pacific. The ocean stretched gray and infinite beyond the Columbia River, mouth fishing boats barely visible through the weather. Hugh's voice came through clear despite the distance from Bellingham. "They were formally indicted yesterday," he said. "Nadine and Bryce both. Alaska charged them under AS 1151.200 Class B felony for endangering the welfare of a vulnerable adult. Oregon added charges under ORS 124-110 for elder financial abuse." I watched a gull fight the wind wings, beating against resistance that wouldn't yield. "And Bryce, additional insurance fraud charge. Apparently he used stolen identity documents to set up the beneficiary changes. That's federal. The weight I'd carried since September didn't lift, it just shifted, settled into a different configuration. Justice accomplished felt less like victory and more like accounting numbers finally adding up to their proper sum. Nadine's event planning company filed for bankruptcy last week," Hugh continued. "The legal fees, the negative publicity, clients started canceling contracts in October. She's done professionally. The predator's empire collapsed. I felt nothing about it, no satisfaction or sorrow, just the hollow acknowledgement that consequences existed whether you believed in them or not. Their lawyers are negotiating plea deals," Hugh said. "District attorney wants to avoid trial, save resources. Do you want to be informed of the outcomes, Hugh?" I looked out at the Pacific, at water that had been moving before I was born and would keep moving long after I was gone. "No, I did what needed doing. What the courts do after that is their business." Hugh paused. "You have a new address, Vernon. A view of the Pacific. That's closure." "Yes," I said. "It is." 2 weeks later, in early November, I sat at my desk sorting through the boxes I'd brought from Portland. Most remained sealed contents I wasn't ready to face yet. But one box labeled personal had been calling to me for days. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a photograph from when Nadine was 8 years old. Summer day on the Oregon coast, her sitting on my shoulders, both of us laughing at something Faye had said behind the camera. Nadine's hair was lighter, than sun-bleached from swimming lessons and playground afternoons. Her hands gripped my forehead for balance, small fingers trusting that I wouldn't let her fall. 8 years old. That was real. The girl who'd fallen asleep during long drives home from camping trips, who'd cried when her goldfish died, who'd asked me to teach her about airplanes because she wanted to understand what her daddy did when he flew away. Justice doesn't heal. It just stops the bleeding long enough to find bandages. I placed the photograph in a manila envelope, addressed it to the Reno address where Nadine would eventually return after whatever sentence she received. No letter, no explanation. Just the image of who she'd been before she became who she was. I wasn't forgiving her. I was grieving her. Grieving the 8-year-old who'd sat on my shoulders and believed I could keep her safe from everything. That girl deserved a better ending. So did I. I sealed the envelope affixed. The stamp wrote her address in careful block letters. No return address, no name. Just the photograph and the weight of 46 years of fatherhood that hadn't been enough to save her from herself. 10 weeks after Alaska in early December, Cyrus called. I'd moved to the outdoor porch despite the cold, wrapped in the wool jacket Faye had given me for Christmas 2019. The Columbia River mouth churned below gray water, meeting grayer sky in a seamless horizon. Winter in the Pacific Northwest meant rain and wind and the kind of cold that settled into your bones if you let it. Called to check, Cyrus said without preamble. I'm good, I said. You good, season's ending, fish running late this year. We fell into comfortable silence, two men who'd learned that conversation didn't require constant words. I could hear wind on his end too, the particular howl that came off the Tongass Narrows when winter storms pushed through. Case made the Ketchikan paper last week, Cyrus said. Indictment's official now. Hugh told me. You doing okay with it? I considered the question. Was I okay? I'd survived attempted murder by my own daughter, documented her conspiracy, watched her get arrested and charged and bankrupted. I'd packed up 41 years of marriage, moved to a coastal town where nobody knew my name, started building something that looked like peace from the wreckage of family. Oh, yeah, I said, I am. Grief for who someone was hurts more than anger for who they became. Cyrus, I said, surprising myself. You know what I miss most, flying into Ketchikan at dawn? The way Deer Mountain comes up through the clouds when you're approach the water silver in the early light. 40 years I made that flight. Never got tired of it. Cyrus was quiet for a moment. Then, come visit in the spring. I'll take you out on the water, show you the channels from a different angle. Something shifted in my chest, not the heavy weight of grief or the cold satisfaction of justice, but something lighter, warmer. Human connection offered without obligation, friendship extended without conditions. I smiled, first genuine smile since Faye died, maybe before, the kind that reached my eyes and made my face hurt from using muscles that had forgotten their purpose. I laughed, actually laughed, the sound surprising even to me. Deal. Good, Cyrus said. I'll hold you to it. We hung up a few minutes later after talking about nothing important, weather and fishing and the minor mechanics of daily life that mattered more than grand gestures. Some things you lose for good, some things you find when you weren't looking. Cyrus was the second kind. I walked back inside, still smiling, ready to make coffee and watch the evening rain. On my desk sat the sealed envelope with Nadine's childhood photograph stamped and ready to mail. Beside it, a second envelope I hadn't noticed before, postmarked Ketchikan 3 days ago. Return address in Faye's handwriting. The envelope had been from Cyrus. Inside a note explaining he'd found stationery I'd left at his house, Faye's old correspondence cards she'd packed for the Alaska trip years ago. He'd used one without thinking. The handwriting was his, not hers. Grief had made me see ghosts in cursive. I'd filed the note away, embarrassed by my own desperation to find her in impossible places. 3 months later, I woke at 5:30 a.m., 40-year habit unchanged. But for the first time in 5 years, I didn't dread the silence. The Astoria apartment filled with December dawn, gray light filtering through windows that faced both the Columbia River and the Pacific beyond. I made coffee the way Faye had taught me, 2 scoops, not 3 water, just off boiling, and stood at the window watching the Astoria Megler Bridge emerge from morning mist. 4.1 miles of gray steel connecting Oregon to Washington, arcing across the river mouth like a promise kept. I used to fly past this bridge hundreds of times, looking down at it from cruising altitude, seeing it as just another landmark on the approach to Portland. Now I looked up at it from ground level, watched fishing boats pass underneath, counted the support columns that held thousands of tons of steel above dark water. More beauty in what you could see from the ground than I'd known. Ryan was visiting next Tuesday for winter break. He'd called last week to ask if he could come, not waiting for invitation, just asking permission to spend 3 days in Astoria, learning about the town I'd chosen. That shift from obligation to genuine desire meant more than any apology could. I volunteered at the Astoria Library Wednesdays and Fridays, helping veterans navigate pension applications and VA paperwork. The library manager, a woman named Margaret Stone, who'd served in the Navy during Desert Storm, had asked if I'd give an aviation history talk in January. I'd said I'd think about it. The idea of standing in front of strangers talking about flight still felt foreign, but less impossible than it had 3 months ago. I used to land planes for a living. Now, I watched bridges helped veterans drank coffee while light changed the color of water. Peace didn't announce itself with trumpets. It just showed up one morning and stayed. That evening before sleep, I took out the Elgin pocket watch like I'd done every night for 5 years. Tonight I noticed the minute hand had begun to lag slightly, the mechanism showing its age after decades of faithful service. The watch needed winding. I wound it gently, feeling the resistance build as the mainspring tightened. 7 turns, exactly the number Faye had pressed into my memory 40 years ago, her hands covering mine, patient with my impatience as she always was. Some objects hold more than time. They hold the hands that wound them. I set the watch on the nightstand beside Faye's photograph, the one from our wedding day. 47 years ago, both of us impossibly young and certain that love would be enough. It had been enough. Not perfect, not without damage and disappointment, but enough. You were right about most things, Faye, I said to the photo, to the memory, to whatever piece of her existed in the space between living and remembering. Not about everything, but most things. Through the window, the Astoria Megler bridge lights reflected on dark water, steady points of illumination marking safe passage across dangerous currents. The watch had kept time through 40 years of marriage, 5 years of grief, 1 very long week in Alaska. Some things held. Whirls. I walked to the Pacific Beach the next morning at 6, first time since moving to Astoria 3 months ago. My left ankle ached slightly when the weather turned damp. Small reminder of the Alaskan crevice where I'd spent 6 hours waiting for rescue, where Bryce and Nadine had expected me to die. The pain was minor, manageable, instructive. My body carried the evidence of what I'd survived. That seemed right. I stood at the edge where sand met water, watching waves roll in, white-capped and powerful in the dawn light. The Pacific stretched infinite and gray, merging with sky at some invisible horizon. I thought about 40 years of flying, how many times I'd looked down at this ocean from 35,000 feet, seeing it as obstacle to navigate or weather system to avoid. Now I stood below it all, looking out instead of down. Still dark in the west, where the ocean continued forever, but in the east behind me, light was rising soft pink and orange, bleeding into gray, the particular northwest dawn that promised nothing except another day to witness it. Pilots measure altitude in feet above ground, but peace is measured in moments facing light. I pulled out the Elgin watch. 6:04 in the morning, the second hand running smooth and steady after last night's winding. 47 years. This watch had measured time. Wedding gift from Faye's father, carried through every flight, every anniversary, every crisis and celebration that marked a marriage lasting longer than most careers. I put it back in my pocket, felt its weight settle against my chest, turned my face toward the east, toward the light rising behind the coastal hills. Spent 40 years bringing people home through the dark, through storms and mechanical failures and moments when instruments lied and instinct was all you had left. Thousands of passengers who trusted me to calculate risk, navigate danger, land them safely, despite everything that could go wrong at altitude. I'd learned to read weather, to feel turbulence before it hit, to know when to push through and when to divert. Learned that preparation mattered more than courage, that survival was mostly mathematics, and a little bit of grace. Nadine had tried to use Alaska against me, remote terrain, difficult rescue, plausible accident. She'd forgotten that I'd spent 4 decades mastering exactly those variables. That pilots don't panic when systems fail, they calculate, adjust, execute. that the longest flights end the same way as the shortest, with careful descent, proper flare wheels touching ground exactly where you planned. I'd spent 40 years bringing people home through the dark. Now it was my turn, and I knew exactly how to land. The Pacific continued its ancient rhythm behind me. Ahead, the Astoria Library would open in 2 hours. Veterans' forms waited. Ryan arrived Tuesday. Cyrus called Fridays. The captain had landed. If you've stayed with me until now, thank you. There's something I need you to remember. Looking back, I realize I spent years focusing on the wrong things. I thought being a good father meant providing protecting teaching, but I missed the signs. I didn't see what Nadine was becoming because I was too busy remembering who she'd been at 8 years old. Don't make that mistake. Sometimes the people we love most become strangers we no longer recognize. The lesson I learned isn't about dad family revenge, though. That's what some might call my story. It's about knowing when to protect yourself, even from family, especially from family. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, their words, their plans, believe them. I believe God gave me the skills I needed when I needed them most. 40 years of flying taught me to stay calm in crisis, to plan for every contingency, to trust my instruments over my emotions. That dad family revenge you might see in this story, it was really just survival with evidence. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my position? Leave a comment below and let me know I read everyone. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already subscribed to Dad's Calm Revenge for more stories about dignity survival and finding peace on the other side of betrayal, thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. As a reminder, certain details in this story have been adjusted for privacy and storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to specific individuals is coincidental. What matters is the message, and I hope it stays with you.